Someone says they didn't expect things to end up like this, using magic out there. We can see a roadside motel. The person says they had no choice. It was either that or join Giare. A pale, thin-faced man asks a woman if there are any updates, and she shrugs, saying her wing is still active. Saying that if anyone entered the motel, she would know. She is interrupted by the opening of a purple portal. A bright purple energy forms. A gunshot is heard, hitting the woman who is speaking, leaving everyone confused and scared by the scene. The energy remains present at the location. Wondering what happened, the pale man observes the slumped body along with others. Then he screams asking what is happening, and the other man beside him, equally frightened, says he doesn't know either. A rebellious man appears armed, claiming to be an enemy of the most powerful wizards, warning that he is ahead of schedule and suggesting they start from the beginning. A man is sitting with his wrist handcuffed to a table, being watched by another in formal attire, looking like an agent. Handcuffed. He says he doesn't know what these guys want with him. Can someone tell me what is happening here? The young man asks, not understanding as the other sits in front of him. With a symbol on his wrist, he introduces himself as an agent of the Arcane Regulation Guild, saying the man is a suspect in an attack at the Shahe Fitness Center. The detained man asks if this is some kind of joke. He is told that there is no joke, but that a son of the dragon is on the loose and the man was the only conscious person at the scene. Then he tells the young man that magic is real and whether he realizes it or not, he is a wizard, leaving the man shocked, and suggests they return to the initial scenario. Callum Wells says he was at his mother's funeral, and for some reason, there was a man with a strange aura there. He also mentions that he has seen people with that otherworldly presence before, but it was invisible to everyone else except for him. Then the young man feels a pang in his head and wonders if it is just another headache. The man with the blue aura moves away, walking among the attendees, then thinks he has seen a few cases, but as he enters his neighborhood gym, he remembers that it wasn't rare enough to dismiss as mere imagination. He realizes that the owner of this neighborhood establishment is one of those people. The guy waves at Callum Wells and says he hasn't seen him in a while. Alongside him, a dragon wrapped in a red aura makes the same gestures. Seeing the man's hand and the dragon's almost as one, he tries to ignore what he sees when both shake hands. To him, Mr. Shahe was a good person, despite the claws, and he spent a good amount of time at his gym. Placing its paw on his shoulder, the dragon asks the boy to do him a favor. While winking, it points to a woman and says to help her because she is new at the gym. Smiling, the young man says he doesn't mind helping. Mr. Shahe was not human, but he was kind and had been trying to set him up with a girl since his wife's death, and then he approaches and greets the girl. The owner said you need some help, the young man says, thinking that he really enjoys being there. Slightly blushing, the girl replies that yes. When suddenly she starts to stutter, leaving the man confused. Marie falls to the ground while Callum Wells rushes to help and shouts her name. 3 armed men invade the gym, and the young man wonders if this is some kind of robbery. Amidst the smoke, Mr. Shahe shouts for him to get down. With his hand on his head, the young man crouches down, protecting Marie who is unconscious on the floor. The trio fires heavily at Shahe. His eyes turn completely red, emanating rays, and his mouth releases smoke. Then the dragon roars with all its might. Inhaling, he begins to form a fireball in his throat. Then, he launches a fire attack against the men. Callum Wells tries to understand what is happening amidst all the smoke. Then the young man feels a sharp pain in his head. Watching the burning scene and the son of the dragon fight, he tries to stay awake. The fire spreads and engulfs the entire place while the man is on the ground. He places his hand over his face and realizes he has fainted. Among the smoke, Marie lies on the ground, and the young man realizes the gravity of her condition. Then he lifts her onto his shoulders and begins to carry her out of that place. A cable from the gym's electrical system snaps. Falling onto Callum, he receives an electric shock. More or less, he still manages to move after that. Now the young man is surrounded by a purple aura and says he cannot let the girl go. There is fire and smoke everywhere, and he says he needs to leave the place. Then he screams, and the smoke forces him to close his eyes. Callum Wells loses strength and falls to his knees on the ground with Marie's arms still around his neck. Gathering all his strength, the young man stands up and says he needs to survive. Then the purple energy becomes more powerful. Surprised, he realizes he is now outside the gym, having teleported through some kind of portal. As he looks at his hand on the concrete of the street, he tries to understand what happened. When someone approaches him from behind and asks what he is doing, the man asks him to wait there while he snaps his fingers, and the young man realizes it is the same person as before. Then, the suited man casts a power over the burning gym. Perplexed, Callum tries to understand what was happening in front of him. The stranger adjusts his tie and sighs as if it hadn't taken any effort at all. Now, he turns to the young man who is getting up. "What are you?" the figure asks, and our boy ignores him, posing another question. What madness was happening there? Then the other one becomes more serious, noticing something. The suited man touches his ear and warns about a fire at the Shahe gym, with a witness and a victim on site, while Callum insists on understanding. With a symbol on his wrist visible and now addressing the young man, the man asks what his classification is. Confused, the young man asks what he is talking about. Then he says he won't say anything until it is explained what is happening there, to the frustration of the man. The man in blue then quickly handcuffs the young man, shocking Callum Wells. At that moment, he realizes that his headache has magically disappeared. Then the suited man pulls the young man, who screams and questions what he was doing. At GRA, two men observe the hologram of the detainee. One warns the other that he might lose his head for using a magic blocker the way he did. The man with glasses shows surprise that the detainee is still conscious. "I barely noticed, and it seems to be doing him good," replies the stranger. As he observes the image of the young man in the hologram, the colleague asks if he is sure that he is not a mundane. Then he reflects on what happened, saying that the system should have knocked out any mundane in the area, and that the young man not only stayed awake but used some kind of magic to evacuate the other victim. The suited man with glasses finds it strange that a 30-year-old magic user is still unregistered, and the other says he only brought him in, without solving the mystery. Later, in the interrogation room, the same man with glasses says that Callum Wells is no longer a suspect and that they can move on to the next subject. "We need to register him and test him to know his type of magic and understand how you are," he said. Intrigued, the young man does not understand and asks what he is talking about. "Every mage serves the Arcane Regulation Guild," he says, showing images of mages with various colors of auras. "Usually, one starts younger, but Callum started late. But I have a job as an architect, I have clients," the boy explains. "When you finish your service, you will have the skills for a better job," the young man tells him. Realizing he doesn't have much choice, the prisoner questions whether he can just not worry about that. "Deserters are hunted by the guild," says the man with a serious expression, "and then executed," he completes as flames dominate. Our young man widens his eyes, visibly haunted by that as he hears. "We cannot have criminals causing problems now. Mandatory training and a selection," Callum questions as he stands in front of some people. "This is a tyranny I didn't even know existed," he thought, feeling anger rise and sweat trickle down, as if his body was responding to the weight of it. "And now they are claiming control over me," he thinks as he faces the group watching him. "The guild wants everyone to serve them or die, but I won't let that happen," he thinks with a clenched fist, displaying a bracelet. The suited man with glasses asks if the other is ready for the test. Confused, he furrows his brow and asks what exactly that means. "This protected chamber will saturate you with mana," Callum hears and observes glowing and unknown writings on the ceiling above. "The result will show the type of magic while the ceiling of the box releases blue magic." Our young man asks how long it will take, as the blue energy approaches his body. "Just a few seconds more or less," says the man unfazed, shocked by the response. The protagonist says he feels nothing. In the next moment, he is struck by an overwhelming pain in his head that immediately brings him down. He screams that something is wrong and asks them to stop the test while the suited man surrounded by people says he is almost ready. Screaming in pain, he thinks he is going to die while desperately holding his head with his hand. It seems some time has passed, and upon opening his eyes, he sees the suited man with his arms crossed asking if he is back, satisfied to realize that he is. The protagonist sits up and asks if that was normal, and the other man says he suspects it is just a consequence of testing someone as old as he is. "Even so, while you were out, we moved forward and placed your mage mark," he completed. "They tattooed me while I was unconscious," he thinks as he observes the symbol marked on his wrist. Bothered by staring at his wrist, he tells himself that these people don't care at all about freedom. The other explains that being a spatial mage is rare, that he will need a tutor, and the value will count towards his service time. What a scammer, he reflects while casting a furious glance. Callum asks if there is any chance of going home and sorting things out before being taken away, as he gets up from the hospital bed. Agentson can take him. He will be his officer this week, or until he is integrated, he replies while another man disinterestedly looks at his phone. "Nice to meet you," says the protagonist, completely ignored by the agent who keeps his eyes fixed on the device. Angry after being left hanging, the man scowls. In the car heading to another location, the protagonist asks what a spatial mage does to be recruited. Space doesn't have a real attack, so the job is with transportation and will basically be a loader. Then the young man questions what the agent does. Sim replies that he is a pyromancer, so they put him on the front lines, but he also does a bit of aeromancy, and the boy doubts because he thinks the other looks like a spoiled brat. He asks what the guild fights against, and hears that some hunt rebellious mages on Earth and others on the front lines of the 6 portal worlds. He explains while fiddling with his phone. Callum Wells asks what portal worlds are, and Sin explains that they are semi-planes between Earth and the multiverse. These semi-planes provide mana to the planet, and the GRA protects them. Each world corresponds to a type of supernatural: vampires, shapeshifters, fairies, dragon lineage, and sea monsters. When asked by the man about the 6th world, he replies empty. The protagonist stares at him in silence, and doesn't believe it for a second. Sometime later, the car parks in front of a location. In an office, Sin hands a laptop to the surprised rookie, and tells him to look for his first information there. "Tomorrow I will take you back to the East headquarters," he says while Callum holds the device. The agent then tells him to make sure he is ready while walking towards the door. It seems that magical energy is divided into 2 categories: Mana and this, the young man reads, concentrating on trying to understand the difference between them. Mana is like a type of ambient magical atmosphere from which mages can draw power. The mana of a mage is called this, which can take specific and unique aspects. Like the spatial talent I possess, he reflects, paying attention to the information. I want to learn everything, but here there's only the basics, he thinks as he leans back in the chair. I started at a disadvantage since most mage children learn this in kindergarten. Better to start with something simpler, he says as he returns to a normal position. This should be easy, he observes the mechanical pencil on the table. Callum holds his forearm and extends his open hand towards the object, trying to channel magical energy. Focus, the man directs his energy towards the pen. A blue energy projects from his hand to the mechanical pencil, which begins to move rapidly across the table. Push, he exclaims still concentrated, and the object is thrown forcefully, accompanied by a vibrant blue trail cutting through the air. After being launched, it pierces the ceiling and gets lodged in it. It worked, thinks the protagonist, discreetly celebrating with visible pride. It's basically a brute force magic, as I'm using ambient mana instead of my innate vis. But it worked, he reflects with his hand under his chin. Being the GRE's pack Neil wouldn't be so bad if it gave me an excuse to practice. And I need to understand what I'm getting into, he reflects while staring at the tattooed wrist. The Guild of Arcane Regulation, the secret organization of the most powerful, was now part of his reality. A group like that is bound to have skeletons in the closet, he thinks while rummaging through the laptop. I won't become just another cog in their machine. Callum realizes that Sin omitted a key piece of information about the recruitment. More than half of the GRA recruits suffer casualties, mainly due to combat, crimes, or contact with demiplanes. The young man reflects that the casualty rate and the reason seem almost hidden. It is an open secret that all of this is political. Almost all casualties affect wizards without ties to families or guilds. If the archmages of the GRA live for hundreds of years, then there is a larger game at play. It is no surprise that they are ensuring everyone lives under their control, or not at all, the man understands. Damn, they probably have consolidated so much power that they don't even need to lift a finger. The system does the dirty work for them. The bureaucracy ensures that the system continues to exist, as those in power want to maintain it. But to hell with all of that, he thinks as he closes the laptop. The GRA can keep everyone else under their thumb, ready to serve, he reflects while Sin snores heavily on the couch. But Callum Wells would rather perish than give up his freedom, he concludes as he rises from the chair. He asks himself that if they want a rebellious wizard they will have one. If I'm going to disappear, then I need to be careful about it, as he grabs a large amount of money from a safe. Any mistake could bring the entire guild down on him, he reflects, closing the zipper of a bag with the money. Then, he opens a window with the bag slung over his shoulder. Callum's sneakers make a noise as they hit the ground. Sin is awakened from his sleep by the sound. The new wizard realizes his slip and hopes he hasn't been noticed. However, the agent violently opens the door. The room is already empty, leaving the man furious. Escaping during my watch, he speaks angrily with his hand on his head, and a green aura forms around him. Then let's see how far he can run, he says as his energy intensifies. I need to get out of here, thinks the rebellious protagonist as he hurriedly walks among various people on the street. He had a few minutes head start on Agent Sin, but he had no idea how fast he could be, he thought, panting. As the agent approached, he thought about what the other had said, that he was a pyromancer and an aeromancer. Sin clenches his fist in anger, emanating green energy. In the worst-case scenario, he can fly like a superjet, says Callum as the agent levitates, surrounded by energy, also concentrated in his clenched fist. And like a green lightning bolt, he shoots toward the sky. Damn, there's no way I can escape him if that's the case, he thinks nervously. That idiot, he better have a good excuse or he just challenged the GRA as an enemy, he thinks, shooting through the air after the fugitive. As a rebellious wizard, he would now be in the sights of the strongest and most dangerous agents of the guild, Sin concludes, anger etched on his face. He reflects on the type of threat involved, aware that there are agents even more powerful than him. As he levitates above the crowd, he considers whether he should alert someone, especially Agent Theron, in case the fugitive is really trying to escape. But he recoils at the idea, furious, reminding himself that he has a reputation to protect and cannot allow them to discover his mistake. With that in mind, he accelerates alone toward the crowd, determined to resolve the situation on his own. Like a green lightning bolt, Sin easily catches up to Callum among the people. Then he notices the sudden presence of the agent beside him and freezes. I found you, he says, looking sinisterly at the protagonist. Surprised and furious, the protagonist looks at the agent. He is shocked by the speed at which he was found, but he doesn't give up and runs to the opposite side. Sin says that Callum cannot escape him. As he runs, the man hears the cutting voice saying that he is just a weakling who slipped through the cracks. People notice the commotion in the air, confused, thinking it's just the weather changing. The rebel realizes that people do not see him. During the chase, he passes just inches from people, but none of them notice him, blind to his magic. Callum thought the crowd would limit Sin's magic, but soon realized he would need to escape another way. He observes his reflection in a shop window. Then the protagonist notices a coat displayed in the store and thinks of a plan. levitating and emanating power. Sun wonders where that idiot could have gone. And again he spots the fugitive. Got him, he asserts, extending his hand toward Callum Wells. Sun places his hand on his shoulder and asks how he could help, surprising the protagonist. Then the agent turns while the other tensely watches him. The agent then widens his eyes in surprise. On the ground, the backpack that Callum was carrying is left alone, to his astonishment. Grinding his teeth, Sun opens the bag. Inside, he sees only clothes. Callum disappears, leaving the agent alone among the crowd. Curse rat, he exclaims, clenching his fist filled with energy. With another bag and disguised in the display coat, the young man waves for a taxi. Masked, he asks the driver to take him to the Wesley Farms. Lowering the fabric that covers his face, he adds for him to take the back roads. Easy to track, commercial planes won't do, so he strikes a deal with an agricultural pilot. Inside the small aircraft, he knew it wouldn't be quick, but by dawn he would be in the middle of nowhere. Saying goodbye to the pilot, he knew the new clothes helped, but they wouldn't hide him for long. In front of the mirror and with a box of dye, he knew he needed to change his appearance to avoid being recognized. And then he starts cutting his brown hair. Strands of hair fall onto the bathroom sink. He stares at himself in the mirror after the makeover and says he will go with black after all. Then comes the paperwork. Wizards need mundane documents, and a magical pawn shop can probably handle that. He opens the door. The attendant is a green being with large lower teeth and pointed ears. He asks how he can help. Callum tells the apron-wearing being that he needs a mundane identity. 2,000, the orc says bluntly. Holding out cash along with the notebook, the man closes the deal. The rebel observes his new identification document with his new name, Chase Hall. This will work, he says, smiling at the Shrek. I stayed off the GRA radar for 30 years, and I will do it again if it's the price of my freedom, he reflects as he walks alone. In the room, the bespectacled agent asks how Callum escaped without triggering the barriers, while the man in the hat stares at the door. Sun tries to justify himself, saying he only sealed the doors since they would be there for one night, and didn't imagine he would jump out the window. The hat-wearing agent says he doesn't detect any magical residue, and it just seems like a simple escape, which leaves the bespectacled man furious. With his hand on his head in frustration, he says that Archmage Duval will not accept that, as she was set to start training him the next day. Looking at them, the man in the hat comments that if the boy knew this, he wouldn't blame him for running away. Irritated, the bespectacled man says he is glad John has a sense of humor about the matter, and that he certainly won't mind being the one to inform Duval. John pointed to himself, his face revealing nervousness, and asked if it would be him. A furious voice echoes from outside a mansion, incredulous at what she heard. He tries to warn that everyone is looking for him, while the furious Archmage tightens her grip on his neck with magic. Trying to bring his hands to his neck, he exclaims that even vampires and shapeshifters have been alerted, but she knows their nature. Furious, she stared at him, curious about what he would say. John concludes, trembling, that learning spatial magic without help is difficult, and that perhaps Callum chose to lead a normal mundane life. The Archmage repeats what she hears from the man with disdain. She exclaims that no one decides to stop using their magic, that he is not a mundane but a rebel wizard, throwing the young man to the ground. Of course, Archmage, he says, dying on the floor, promising to continue the search. Well then, I pray for him and for you to find him, Agent John, Duval says, approaching the man. Or will I have to use my own resources on this matter if this Callum Wells really decided to rebel, she says. Duval concludes by saying that if that is the case, Callum Wells needs to be captured and executed once and for all. A car is parked in front of a small house in the Midwest, where two people are at the door. A blonde woman asks the sheriff if that was the man. They ask if he was there for the property, and getting out of the car, Callum questions if they are the owners. It belongs to my daughter Jessica, the man says, pointing to the young woman who smiles and waves, while he introduces himself as Arthur Langley. Chase Hall, the fugitive, introduces himself using his new name. Arthur Langley stares at him for a few seconds. Then they shake hands. In the kitchen, the old man asks if he is interested in the property. The protagonist comments that the place is nice and quiet. Perhaps fixing it up could keep him busy. Jessica says he seems too young to be retired. Callum smiles and says he is not retired, just taking a break for health reasons. Sheriff Arthur Langley crosses his arms while his daughter comments that she has been trying to sell the property, but there aren't many buyers around those parts. Better for me, the fugitive asserts. The next day, staring at the bag of money, he calculates that he has about 2 years of living expenses after paying for the house. But I can't worry about that right now. The immediate goal is to learn everything I can about magic, reflects the rebel. If I don't master this subject, it's only a matter of time before the GRA catches up with me, he thinks while imagining Sin reaching him. All the readings indicate that spatial mages are limited to portals and minor enchantments. The man observes the computer screen with research. Callum Wells reflects, crossing his hands in front of his face. He didn't believe it, but he thinks it's impossible to learn about space without going through the Archmage, since she is the only authority, which shows how monolithic the GRA is. The first time he created a portal was accidental, reflects the man, staring at an open field. He remembers when he pulled Marie from the fire through a portal purely out of his subconscious desire. Then the young man concentrates the magic in his hand, trying to create a portal intentionally. When on the ground, a portal opens, surrounded by his purple energy. Callum Wells sighs upon realizing that it worked. "And here we go," says the protagonist. He takes a step toward the portal. Finally, the young man steps into the portal he just created. Then he emerges from the portal in another part of the field where he was. Proud, the rebel celebrates defeat while staring at his clenched fist. He understands that the distance was a bit limited, but not bad for a first attempt. With his hand on his chin, the man imagines what else he can make work. It's Monday, and Callum Wells takes his scalding shower amidst the steam. As he puts in the shampoo, he is surprised to see that it is already empty. Then a small portal opens in a compartment with other bottles. He reaches his hand through the portal and begins to feel around for the shampoo. Smiling and proud of himself, he manages to grab the item using his magic. On Wednesday, Callum tries to form a sphere of this, commenting that it is one of the first things a young mage learns. A spatial sphere may have no offensive capability, but I would be lying if I said it isn't cool, he states with a smile. Friday arrives, and the rebel says that everything points to telekinesis being the domain of force mages, and he is not one, he asserts while holding a purple sphere in his hand. A stone with yellow energy represents telekinesis, and another with spiral purple energy represents gravikinesis, the protagonist explains, countering by making the object weightless. Then, with the sphere in his open hand, he makes small stones levitate, believing it to be an unusual method. But without formal education, that method has to be enough for him, he concludes, launching them along with the energy. The attack is fired at a tree. On Sunday morning, we see the protagonist sitting and meditating outdoors. Trying to feel the mana around him, the rebel concentrates, and with his eyes closed, he breathes, feeling the energy. "I can see things with my eyes closed," he realizes while visualizing the house. Seeing the curtains inside the house, he notices that he can even see through things if he pushes himself. Reflecting on the range still being limited, Callum sees Jessica walking through the house. He gets startled, his eyes widening. "Mr. Hall," Jessica calls, looking for the young man. Waving to the woman, he smiles and asks what brings her there. Then she says that the kids are going back to school, and some might show up in his yard, even though they were told not to. The protagonist laughs and says it's all right and that he hasn't even started cleaning the parts of the yard that are overgrown with weeds. "Don't worry about that. The kids in the area do well outdoors," he says with a smile. Jessica mentions that she was in the area and decided to stop by, bidding farewell with a warning for the young man not to disappear. Then he says goodbye with an awkward wave. Callum panics and wonders if the woman saw anything. Looking around, he thinks of the hours he spent casting vis in all directions, leaving visible purple marks. "I need to understand how to suppress residual magic," he thinks as he runs away. Nervous and sweating, he realizes that if anyone feels this in his yard, it will be the end of his disguise. In a large room, a woman in a lab coat shows a clipboard to a man who questions what request that is. She says that the standard exam confirmed that he had indeed never touched magic before, but detected some anomalies. Flipping through the report, the bespectacled agent asks the young woman to continue. Then she explains that she didn't notice until she replaced the mana supply. The blocker dissolved with hundreds of units of mana, but the substitute was left containing only 3, she explains while examining the blocker. It was noticed that somehow it absorbed 97 units of mana. The man asks what that means, and she replies that this is far more than a common novice mage should possess. Complete that if he never used magic, his pool of viz should be full. After all, he didn't go around casting spells. Then he says he doesn't know what that means, but he believes it is connected to the fact that a 30-year-old wizard has never noticed magic. Looking at the clipboard, the suited man wonders who Callum Wells really is. The protagonist closes his eyes, focused. Then she sighs softly, maintaining her concentration while carefully observing what happens around her. "Alright, this should be enough vis," concludes the wizard, observing the energy in the environment. Vis is a type of magical energy that is unique to each wizard. After positioning a circle on the table, he begins to spin it, and releases a huge amount of purple lightning. The object spins faster and faster. "Perfect," exclaims the wizard, satisfied with the result achieved. With the vortex pattern he found online, he can use the ball bearings to erase any trace of magical residue. Callum observes the circle in his palm, certain that in just a few weeks he has made significant progress, and this will help him stay off the GRA's radar. Feeling that he should be happy, but something inside him remains empty, the rebel furrows his brow. Recalling his mother's funeral, the wizard realizes he started to run away on the same day he buried her. The protagonist feels he has been moving so fast that he never had time to reflect on what he lost. "My parents, my wife," he reflects, remembering the memory of their gravestones with bouquets. Recalling a picture of them all together, he realizes that his hometown was yet another loss in his life. "I wonder if Celine would have liked it here," he says, staring at the ceiling. Callum shakes his head negatively as if he needs to push those thoughts away and tries to refocus. "The GRA wants to capture me and turn me into one of their pack horses," he says, clenching his fist tightly. Determined, he states that he was forced to flee and will not lose. He understands that he needs to get to know the city better if he wants to blend in there. "Hello," says a girl at the snack bar with a curious smile, commenting that she has never seen the man around before. "I'm just getting to know the area," explains the young man, asking if she has any suggestions. Friendly, the girl begins to recommend the best dishes. Callum starts to sweat as he notices something strange. Nervous, he wonders what this weird thing is that he is detecting. Questioning if it could be a basement, he tries to look through the piping. He then realizes that the place is larger than he expected. He finally notices a dog but is startled to see that it is the size of a man. A male voice calls him, and as he turns, his eyes go straight to the gun in the man's pocket. Taking off his hat, the sheriff comments that it is strange to see him around, and the newcomer replies that he is getting to know the local cuisine. Arthur Langley says that his niece Clara makes the best steaks, and the girl agrees. She steps away, and Callum comments that she seems nice. The sheriff says that the young people there are well adjusted and no one has crossed his yard yet. "We have a great priority in respecting territory around here," the smiling old man states. Territory, the protagonist reflects, feeling uncomfortable. "Look, I don't want to take up too much of your lunchtime," the old man asserts, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. The old man whispers that he has seen strange faces around and asks that if he notices anything odd, the man should get in touch. Strange faces, the wizard thinks, feeling a slight tightening of nervousness in his chest. "I was also a strange face before," says Callum, asking if the sheriff had mentioned him to others. Agreeing, he confesses that yes, but then he realized that he was not from the big city. "Not like the people I'm talking about," the sheriff replies seriously, maintaining a firm gaze. That statement hits the rebel deeply. He wonders if Arthur could be talking about the GRA, which could be bad. "Your order is ready, Mr. Hall," says Clara, holding the packaged order for takeout, and the young man nods. Outside, Callum wonders if they could track him through the tattooed symbol, and staring at his wrist, he decides he needs to get rid of it. "It seems that the magic is confined to this small point that represents my spatial type," observes the wizard. Thinking it shouldn't hurt that much, after all, it was just a small drop of ink, he prepares himself. Sitting down, he begins to channel energy toward his own wrist, focusing on the exact point where the tattoo is marked. Then, the point begins to be pulled from the tattoo. Wide-eyed, the man lets out a painful grunt as he continues to extract it. His fist is clenched, and the vanished point has given way to a wound on his wrist. From the center of the tattoo, a small black sphere emerges, floating before him. The wizard breathes heavily, still feeling the pain coursing through his body. "I've got you," he says, observing the sphere in the palm of his still trembling hand. Even though the rest of the tattoo needed to be removed, the protagonist decides to do that later. Then, the rebel throws the sphere into the flames of the fireplace, watching as it slowly dissolves in the fire. He exclaims for it to burn, as the sphere is destroyed by the blazing flames of the hearth. He wonders if the small siphons he created to store vis can also release it when needed. Making portals and small tools is easy, but the cost increases. "Trying to do something larger than a person exhausts me like a portable battery," thinks the wizard. Quickly, he reflects that he could recharge with this in a critical situation, as if he needed to escape. When suddenly someone knocks on the door, startling the rebel in the midst of his thoughts. He realizes someone is there and hesitates whether to answer, feeling the tension rise as he quickly turns toward the door. The protagonist begins to sweat, the tension increasing with every thought, as he wonders if it could be the GRA. Then he uses magic to see through the door, and sees Arthur Langley accompanied by another police officer. He wonders in surprise if that is the sheriff, while the old man patiently waits beside the young man in a cap. Uncomfortably and hesitantly greeting the gentleman, he asks what brings him there that afternoon. Arthur apologizes for appearing suddenly but says he needs to ask a few questions. With his voice laden with apprehension and his gaze visibly tense, he asks if he did something wrong. Holding his hat tightly, the sheriff asks the young man exactly where he was last night, around 3 in the morning. At 3 in the morning the night before, the wizard is lying in his bed, thoughtful and raising suspicions. He recalls the entire conversation about territory he had with Langley earlier at the diner. The animalistic figure of the dogman also haunts his thoughts. This basically confirms that the Langleys are shapeshifters, he thinks, recalling the image of the elderly man greeting him. Clara, the young waitress at the diner, and the sheriff's niece, also appears in his thoughts. Jessica, his daughter, crosses his mind as he wonders what the sheriff really meant in that conversation at the diner. Did he try to scare me? He questions, recalling the man's words about seeing some strangers walking around. But he remembers that the old man seemed well-intentioned when he asked him to let him know if he saw anything unusual, which makes him hesitate in his judgments. In any case, it seems like a good time to just hide for a while. A strange noise begins at the window, like a scratching. Startled, the protagonist gets up, asking what caused that noise. Quickly, a purple energy begins to spread. Looking through the window, the young man notices a quick movement in the bushes and wonders if it could be an animal. Callum, tense with the situation, says that it is too far to identify it. The wizard, with a flashlight, decides to go outside to try to identify the animal in the night. As he illuminates the bushes, the protagonist sees nothing, only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. He believes he might just be imagining things. A chilling breeze passes and makes Callum shiver to his core. The young man runs back to his house and slams the door, trembling and with his heart racing. Back to the present, the sheriff returns to the question of where Callum was at 3 in the morning. Then the sheriff tells the boy not to get upset, as his job is to ask these questions. The wizard replies that he was sleeping and asks back if there was any incident. Suspecting, the deputy questions if there is anything to prove that, like some kind of security system in the house. Annoyed, the protagonist asks if he will need a lawyer. The sheriff looks embarrassed and says that Callum is not being considered a suspect and that he just wanted to be able to take him off the list. Indeed, there is a security system, but just a door that records logs without cameras, says the protagonist. Callum thinks that even if there were cameras, he couldn't let them know about it since he practices his magic in the backyard. Then the deputy finally decides to reveal that there was a murder in the neighborhood. In shock, the protagonist questions the fact that such a crime occurred. The sheriff's assistant says that someone broke into Mr. Hardy's house and asks if Callum had seen anything. Stammering, the wizard says he saw nothing, and then he remembers the noise from the night before. The protagonist was very focused on the shapeshifters and the GRA. Frustrated, Callum thinks that because of this he did not consider that there was a criminal out there. Noticing the man's pale face, the sheriff asks if he remembered anything important. Finally, the wizard, even though bothered, decides to share that something woke him up last night, and he thought it was a large animal, which is all he knows. The assistant questions about the animal, while the sheriff takes notes, and thanks him for the information, as it will help with the investigation, and says he will contact him if he has any news. As they leave the house, the deputy duo asks if he bought the story that Callum told. The boy is definitely not telling everything, but he is also not the murderer, the sheriff replies. Inside the car, fastening their seatbelts, the sheriff says they know who committed the crime but did not want to believe it. Tense, Arthur Langley says that the situation is about to get very complicated from now on. Shouting, the sheriff exclaims that the man has no right to commit crimes in his town, that it is not his territory. The vampire, with an ironic smile, says he has no idea what Arthur is talking about, and that if one of his pets had a tragic accident, the problem is the deputies. Irritated, the sheriff emphasizes that the victim was finished off by a vampire. They tried to make it look like it was someone else, Arthur says as he sits down. The sheriff exclaims that he smells parasites like the vampire from afar. Shrugging, the pale man says he does not understand why this is his problem and that he is not responsible for the deputy's incompetence with his kind. Unless you are insinuating that it is one of my vampires, the vampire inquires. And if that is the case, it is a very serious accusation. The vampire narrows his eyes trying to intimidate the sheriff. Not at all intimidated, Mr. Arthur says that there were no vampires until that man arrived and that he knows it was one of them and will make sure to catch him. With a laugh, the vampire taunts the sheriff saying he wants to see him try to do that. The deputy then grits his teeth in anger at the pale man's audacity. Again with a provocative air, the vampire says that if Winnett's pack wants to challenge them, he will accept, and the sheriff gets irritated and makes abrupt movements towards the man. As he tries to confront and insult the pale man, he asks the sheriff to be careful. The vampire stares at Arthur with a threatening look, who stares back, noticing that he is being intimidated. Then the sheriff turns and shouts for the deputy to get that pale man out of his sight. At home with his daughter, Arthur Langley says that the vampires killed one of the humans in town, and that they will continue since they do not have enough to face them. Frustrated, the sheriff recounts that he couldn't even talk to the leader, who is just another inferior vampire. Clenching his fists in anger, the deputy says he wishes he could take those creatures back to where they came from. If he were younger, he would have already done it. On the phone, Chester asks if the sheriff has finished complaining. Yes, Alpha Chester, the deputy murmurs. The man on the phone explains that without proof, the GRA will side with the vampires, and that he will send 2 packs of wolves, but they cannot help if a confrontation occurs. Chester says he believes it will be something much bigger than a nest of criminal people. The sheriff questions why they chose Winnett since there was nothing in this town. Then the gray-haired man on the other end of the phone says it is not just Winnett but also 5 other cities with the same problems, which leaves the Langleys shocked. The deputy questions what is the point of the GRA's rules if they come and do as they please anyway. Chester says he understands Arthur's frustration and that if they catch him, they can end the vampires. And he asks the Langleys to keep an eye out, which they nod in agreement. Then he says that the issue is not whether the vampires will kill someone, but rather who they will choose, Chester inquires. I should be careful, thinks the protagonist in a noisy market with people talking around. Callum laments that he has little money and needs to save more for emergencies. With all this murder and shapeshifter situation, the wizard feels restless. He looks around uncomfortably and thinks it would be better for him to just leave Winnett completely. Upon returning home, he remembers how much money he invested in it, and that leaving everything would be the worst possible scenario. The wizard hoped to generate some income by enchanting items and selling them later. Inside his house, browsing the internet, the protagonist complains that they have placed heavy restrictions on those who want to use magic forums. He does not have an account registered on the site. The enchanted sphere loses its power after a few hours. Callum bangs on his notebook because he cannot create an account since he wants to stay hidden. The protagonist puts his hands on his head, very frustrated with the current situation. He thinks it would be good to reinforce his house with some shields or something similar, casting a spell to create a wall with purple lightning. The wizard had an idea for a gravity wall that could deflect bullets. While performing his magic, he still hasn't figured out a way to sustain the wall for more than a minute. With some resources, he might discover a way. But any advanced application of spatial magic is protected by Archmage Duval, a lady with red hair. Callum feels very limited by not being able to conduct his research with the proper materials. He says it's like trying to reinvent the wheel from scratch. In the tool shop, a man with a smile comments that the protagonist bought something for protection. With an awkward laugh, he says that with everything happening, it's better to be safe than sorry. Tense, the wizard knows that it's not just the recent murders, but also that he feels the GRA could be anywhere, watching his steps. As he picks up a weapon, the protagonist wonders if projectiles are effective against supernatural creatures. In the shooting range, with people testing their sights, he thinks about whether he can take a shot. He hopes that then his adversaries will also be affected by projectiles, thinks Callum, testing his weapon. Two girls are talking about getting hammers. The protagonist hears them from afar. The Langleys, the wizard recognizes them. He didn't know they were the type to renovate houses. So Callum approaches them and asks if they are the cook and the maintenance girl. The girls are startled because they weren't expecting him. "Don't scare me like that, Mr. Hall," exclaims the younger one. The protagonist apologizes and asks if they are also nervous about the murder that happened. Jessica then laments about Joan, saying she went to the same church as the Langleys. Callum then questions about Joan. He was talking about James Hardy. The girl whispers in the protagonist's ear that there was a second murder last night, the one named Joan, and asks if he didn't already know. In shock, he says he was busy all morning. He wonders if it's some kind of serial killer. The Langleys comment that they were thinking of closing the coffee for a while until this whole situation blows over. Callum laments the situation and offers help if he can do anything. They thank the protagonist. With a smile on his face, he says they can just call him Chase. Upon leaving the shop, the wizard carries his purchased weapon in a bag and, with quick steps, feels nervous and thinks about how terrible the situation is. He takes the weapon out of the bag, thinking about the situation. Murder is one thing, but a serial killer who can escape from shapeshifters is bizarre. The Langleys like their little town and probably don't want the GRA sticking their nose in there. But with so many people kicking the bucket, they might not have another option. Callum stares at his board full of information and thinks he needs to prepare. Both murders happen near his house, and the way things are going, it's likely that another crime will occur that same night. The protagonist becomes thoughtful and reflects on how this highlights two specific threats. The first threat is the supernatural serial killer who is still on the loose. And the second is about the agents that the GRA will send to investigate the case. He gets nervous thinking that one of these threats could show up at his doorstep at any moment. The wizard is using his spatial sense to the limit, as he cannot allow anything to catch him by surprise. Putting some belongings in a bag, the young man thinks he needs to store all his things. He also remembers that he needs to enchant the bearings of the circles, and leave his weapons already loaded. If he perceives any sign of the GRA's presence, he needs to disappear immediately. Callum looks at his bags and thinks that losing his home will hurt his finances. Then he grips his weapon while concluding that this is a small price to pay to stay off the GRA's radar. The range of his spatial sense is increasing, and if he makes an effort, he can even see farther parts of the city. He notices that Jessica is standing by the window to keep an eye on the coffee. Meanwhile, Clara is wearing a hooded jacket and walks toward the shop. The sheriff is sitting there in the department. Our wizard lets out a tired sigh, knowing that this night is going to be very long. Overcome by sleep, his eyes begin to weigh as if they are about to close. By morning, a car quickly arrives in front of the house. Callum wakes up with a start, worried and irritated for having fallen asleep. Then he realizes that Jessica is running in, asking about Mr. Hall. The protagonist finds it strange that she is there in such a way and imagines that something must have happened, thinking that it is all his fault. He asks what is going on, reflecting on how he should have been more careful with his use of mana. The girl grabs him by the shirt and seems desperate as she screams that she really needs his help. Her hands tremble and Callum questions what is happening. Jessica explains that it is about Clara. The other woman has been taken, and she is terrified while several menacing-looking men are around her, smiling maliciously. Callum questions who took the girl. The blonde says it was the vampires, who at night watched the woman in a hood in the middle of the empty street with their glowing red eyes. They call her the sheriff's little pup. Then her blonde hair flies as she puts her arms in front of her face to protect herself from a strong wind that hits her. One of the beings with a red aura approaches suspiciously, giving a not-so-innocent wave. This guy asks the girl to follow him somewhere. Clara's eyes light up with a red glow, and smoke of the same color surrounds her face. Back in the present time, Jessica explains that the vampires made the girl walk to their nest. Then she screams desperately, saying that the wizard had promised he would help. He hardly knows what to say at that moment, and wonders what the hell he can do. Callum questions whether he should admit that the supernatural exists, thinking of books with writings and symbols. It was Jessica who caught him with his vis before he knew how to hide it, so he doesn't even know if he could convince her that he is not a wizard. The young man tries to calm the girl, suggesting that they go into the house first. His hand holds her shoulder as he thinks that he has no choice. He cannot simply run away and leave Clara alone in the hands of vampires. Our wizard realizes that Jessica mentioned that the vampires took the girl, not that they took her life. The woman confirms that this is indeed the case and seems genuinely worried. Callum knows that he cannot face a bunch of supernatural beings in a fair fight, especially at the level he is at. Then the blonde grabs him again and tries to convince him to help. The protagonist becomes serious and says his name before continuing. He holds her hand in a comforting manner and promises that he will do everything possible to help. The young man grabs his weapon and says he needs more information. Then he swallows hard, hoping he is not making a mistake. A car passes by the motel on the road. Callum is at the wheel and notices that a strange feeling takes over the environment again. Looking at the motel, he knows it is something supernatural, and he observes a woman smoking a cigarette outside, thinking that this is interesting. At that moment, the car arrives at the parking lot of the place. Jessica tells the wizard that her family can help him. He looks around and seems worried. Then he is shocked by something he sees in front of him. The protagonist realizes that everyone in that place is a shapeshifter, seeing various different creatures. That is when the sheriff grabs the blonde by the shoulders desperately and asks what the hell she is doing. He says they should not involve the GRA in this, and Callum realizes that the shark-toothed, pointy-eared being is indeed the sheriff. The wizard is surprised to see that the man thinks he is part of the GRA. Our young man tells the old man that he should pretend he doesn't know him and that he has never been in that place. The gray-bearded man looks at him suspiciously. Then his eyes light up and his mouth makes a very loud sound, sending powerful waves through the air. He asks everyone present if they heard what was said. Now Callum is sitting on a bench and hears someone questioning what he can do. A canine-looking being says that it will not ask many questions, but would like to have an idea of what awaits them. The sheriff explains that the vampires have taken the motel further down the street and will try to conquer their territory as well. He remembers the quiet motel that is on the road. The young man says that they have a wizard there since he has been feeling a presence all week, and he imagines it is the girl with the cigarette. Then the old man says that he really believes that. So far, the vampires from this nest have already taken the lives of 2 people. Callum questions why nothing has been done so far if they already knew about the culprits of the murders. The bearded man explains that the Winnet gang is not strong enough to challenge them, and that the treaty prevents other supernatural beings from getting involved without concrete evidence. According to him, shapeshifter groups are vulnerable because they take the blame for any little thing, and he finds it absurd that the guild is responsible for peace and does nothing. The protagonist is surprised to hear about the treaty. Vampires are taking lives, but nothing can be done just because of the ridiculous GRA rules. Our young man looks down and becomes thoughtful. He reflects on how Clara is there at the motel with the vampires, and he uses his spatial sense, knowing that his mana will be able to reach her. Then he finally manages to find the girl's presence. The vampires have the audacity to say that she is there of her own free will, but the sheriff shouts that this is nothing but an absurd lie. Callum asks what will happen when they manage to bring the girl back. The old man says that when they have the girl, they can contact Alpha Chester to send the rest of the wolf pack. With reinforcements, they will be strong enough to challenge the bloodsuckers and drive those bastards out of Winnet. The protagonist questions how to permanently eliminate a vampire. Weapons made with Mordite mineral cut off the regeneration ability of the mosquitoes, but the sheriff explains that they don't have any at the moment. However, a good old stab to the heart or brain will also do the trick. Our young man asks if firearms could also work for this purpose. These parasites are very fast bastards. Hitting a precise shot in the right place would be a great challenge. Callum thinks this is not going to be easy at all. The old man seems surprised to hear the mage say he will figure it out. Jessica questions whether he can really do anything. Holding his weapon with a determined expression, the protagonist asserts that he will bring Clara back home. But for that, he will need a few things. A few moments later, Callum asks if the place he is in is a cell, and the sheriff explains that it was the only soundproof room there, and says that the pillows are ready. The bearded man says he doesn't know what the guy is up to, but that time is essential and he can't take long. Our spatial mage assures that he will finish everything he needs to do in just 10 minutes. But the wolfman leaves the room saying he will only give 5 minutes. The protagonist looks back for a moment, and then becomes nervous thinking about where he has gotten himself into. If he fails, it won't just be the GRA on his tail, but he will also anger the vampires and disappoint the shapeshifters. Callum has no idea what that mage is capable of, but the mage saw Clara, who is chained up and completely alone, so he can't just stand there doing nothing. Now we can see that same motel again, still during the day. One of the vampires comments that the shapeshifters are too quiet, and that he thought they would have done something by now. The mosquito asks the mage if there is any news, to which she replies that her wing is still active. The woman smokes her cigarette while saying that if anyone enters the motel, she will know, but a portal begins to open right there, and suddenly her head is hit by something that causes great damage. The vampires are shocked and question what the hell is happening there. They imagine it must be the shapeshifters, but have no idea how they could have done this. Meanwhile, Callum is covered by his purple aura holding his weapon and thinks that one is down. Some time ago, the protagonist was thinking about how there must be a way to use portals, teleportation, and mana sense that the GRA still doesn't know about. They say the special magic is not offensive, but that can't be true. The young man needs to be able to defend himself somehow. The mage was trying to think of a way to use the portals along with other weapons. One example of this would be to throw a knife in front of him and make it fly several meters away. Callum holds a pencil and imagines an even better option. That option would be a firearm. Back to the present time, the protagonist holds his weapon near the portal and decides that the next targets will be the vampires. One of the bloodsuckers shouts for the others to be warned about the supposed invasion. But then he is also hit squarely, leaving his friend scared. He tries to call for help, but is also struck before he can finish the sentence. Callum notices that he now only has a few seconds before the other vampires appear, so he needs to teleport Clara out of there. It's difficult to do something like this from a distance, but his spatial awareness makes it possible. He is careful but realizes that it's complicated to fix his energy, since the girl doesn't have much visibility, and it still feels a bit slippery. Then he finally manages to open a portal right behind the girl, who is now enveloped by the wizard's purple energy. At that moment, Clara passes through the portal and arrives in the soundproof room. The young man runs out almost immediately. Callum feels relieved that his plan worked since he has no experience with long-distance teleportation, especially when it comes to human beings. Another vampire appears in the motel room, questioning what the hell is happening in this place. He doesn't notice the small portal behind him. Then another shot echoes through the area, and the parasite notices the bodies lying on the ground. The protagonist can already feel fatigue taking over, but he can't stop now. Other vampires come running into that same room. One of them shouts that they are being attacked and orders them to investigate the area to find the culprit. These big mosquitoes try to understand the situation, and our wizard thinks that as long as they are confused, his speed doesn't matter. Callum is even breathing heavily, but he doesn't want anyone to leave there alive. He hits another shot, and he will continue even if it uses all his mana. Another target is hit squarely. A guy is sitting on the floor in panic at seeing the others fallen around him, and then he curses upon noticing the portal right next to his head. Ketchup splatters everywhere. Outside the cell, the sheriff counts the seconds while Jessica hopes for the best. And suddenly, the two hear a strange sound. The woman opens the door worriedly, shouting Chase's name. The protagonist says that the job is done and that Clara is already safe. Jessica asks the girl if she is okay, but she is confused and only questions what is happening. The old man says that the rescue took only 45 seconds and tries to understand how this is possible, then wants to know what happened to the vampires. Callum tells him that they were all taken care of. Thinking that he let the motel be engulfed in flames, he says they will need to send the firefighters to the location. At this, the sheriff asks if he is talking about the motel and finds it strange because he doesn't feel any kind of magic emanating from the young man. He is about to ask something, and the circle on the protagonist's necklace glows with purple energy. Our wizard warns the old man that they need to act quickly before the whole neighborhood catches fire. Callum gained a lot by taking care of the vampires, and he thinks he needs to get home soon to sort everything out. At that moment, someone stops him from getting into the car by calling his name. Jessica waits to talk to the protagonist. He asks if the woman shouldn't be with Clara, but she says she just wanted to thank him. Our young man is about to say that it's no problem, but he is interrupted. The blonde gives Callum a kiss on the cheek, which leaves him a bit surprised. The wizard turns all red with embarrassment. Poor guy. Jessica says she needs to go back now because Clara needs help. The protagonist is still a bit shy and even stutters when he says that everything is fine. Now the wolves are gathered, and the sheriff informs Alpha Chester that the problem with the vampires has been resolved, so the man asks what he did. The old man assures him that he did absolutely nothing, and that no member of the group was involved in this. Then the Alpha, through the phone, asks Arthur to explain better what happened. The sheriff says that a man offered help and asked them not to ask questions, and confesses that they might not even know his real name. Chester questions whether it was a shapeshifter or a wizard, to which the other comments that he saw a wizard tattoo but didn't notice any signs of magic. The braided Alpha falls silent upon hearing that the guy might be a fae, but he also didn't seem to fit that type. They comment on how the other vampires will not like this at all, and at that moment a figure stands in front of the burning motel. The man with sharp teeth really doesn't seem happy, and the guy on the phone comments that if no one knows anything, then there's nothing to be done. Observing Jessica and Clara reunited, the sheriff tells the Alpha that they owe one to the mysterious guy, and Chester asks who this person is that they owe so much. Then he tells Arthur to keep an eye on him, while the protagonist drives his car with a calm expression, and adds that you can't trust wizards. Callum takes such a hot shower that it even releases steam. He thinks he has been in the shower for at least half an hour, but he wonders why he still feels so dirty. The young man remembers how one of the vampires was scared in the motel. Then he understands the reason for feeling this way, and it's because he ended so many lives that day. Of course, those lives were of vampires, but he questions why it was so easy. The man has just started learning magic, and he was already able to destroy an entire nest of monsters. If the wizard were some kind of villain, he knows there is no one in this world who could stop him. Looking at the power in his hands, he thinks that maybe the GRA is right to impose restrictions on this kind of thing. But then he disagrees with himself, knowing that if everything were up to the GRA, Clara would still be a hostage of the vampires. Seeing his reflection in the mirror, he imagines that there must be a solution. The fire at the motel should destroy any evidence of his involvement in the case. But nothing guarantees that the Langleys won't spread the details of what happened. Callum thinks he should never have gone into that basement with the shapeshifters. If he had been smarter, he could have done everything alone without anyone but Jessica knowing. He had hopes of staying in Winnet for a while longer, but maybe it's time to move on. Now we can see the police station, where the sheriff has just arrived and is still walking through the door. The mustached man asks if they are already there, and the woman behind the counter replies that they are waiting for him downstairs. Arthur lets out a tired sigh and hopes they haven't sent a vampire. Then he realizes that the smell seems to come from a wizard and a fae. The old man reaches the lower floor and takes off his hat as he greets the two agents who are waiting for him. A woman in dark clothes with blue-tipped hair is next to a tall blonde man, who speaks the name of the Alpha Langley. The blonde introduces himself as Agent Ray Danforth, and then explains that the woman is his partner, Agent Felicia Black. The sheriff welcomes the two and says he hopes the GRA team can help solve the case. Ray asks how the cleanup at the motel is going. Arthur says that the other GRA people were still there when he left, but the bodies are already ready for them. The two agents exchange a silent nod. Already in the morgue, the blonde bends down to examine one of the bodies and sees something that seems interesting. He notes that all the wounds look identical. The sheriff says they must agree that this wasn't the work of a shapeshifter and comments that they have no idea how to unravel this mystery. Ray gives a strange smile and assures them they will find out. Then he calls Agent Black to do something. The woman approaches the body and places her hands on its head, and releases a kind of power over it, which glows with a bluish light. Suddenly her eyes light up with the same hue, and her head jerks up abruptly. She returns to normal shortly after, and says that this vampire hadn't seen anything because he was sleeping at the time of the attack. The old man becomes worried upon realizing that this agent can see the memories of people who have passed away. Felicia continues, saying that the other vampire heard gunshots, but was dragged away before he could react. Ray comments that at least one of them must have seen something, but his partner assures him that she only sees confusion and that none of the vampires understood what was happening. This leads the man to believe that the killer must be someone very experienced. Arthur whispers that this is very frightening. The agent wants to know what he just said, but the old man brushes it off, explaining that he just thinks all this destruction is very terrible. Ray doesn't seem to buy the excuse but only says he understands. He tells Alpha Langley that he will need to spend some time in Winnet because it's very dangerous to let someone capable of causing such terror loose. Arthur offers a room for the two and says he can take them there, but the blonde comments that they would like to interrogate some people in town. The old man becomes a little nervous upon hearing the man say that since his pack has no involvement in this, there are two options. Either the person responsible for this was just passing through Winnet at that moment, and if that's the case, they will probably never catch him. Or it's someone unaffiliated, who may have been driven to commit this violence by some provocation from the vampires. The Alpha assures that there is no one in town capable of taking out an entire nest of vampires, but the blonde says they want to confirm this with their own eyes. Arthur swallows hard, a bit nervous, but says that everything is fine. In another location, Callum is facing a suitcase and says that this is all he managed to get from the vampire nest. Inside this suitcase are weapons, money, and some computer drives. The weapons look quite normal, nothing too special, but the ammunition is another story. The bullets are made of silverite, mordite, and corite minerals, and the forums explain that these materials are used against shapeshifters, vampires, and fae. The protagonist believes that these materials will be very useful. He then notices something inside the suitcase and wonders what it is, and he sees that it is a ceramic plate marked with magical symbols. The young man imagines that this belonged to that sorceress and thinks he will need to research the plate later. Opening the suitcase once again, Callum knows he saved the best for last. 100,000 in cash, and who knows how much more in gold bars. The investment the wizard made in the house limited his options, so he needs to set aside most of this money for an emergency fund. But in the worst case scenario, this amount should be enough to ensure his survival elsewhere, even though he still needs to replenish his magical materials. Random stuff from the equipment shop is not enough for his intermediate techniques, but he knows that the sorceress didn't buy this ceramic plate from just any little shop in Winnet, and he might have to order custom items. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires makes the young man jump. Callum stands up nervously and can hardly believe that someone has already arrived there. The man thinks he cannot let anyone see the things in his suitcase. He closes the cabinet just as he hears two knocks on the door. But then he realizes it was just the two blonde relatives of the sheriff, and asks if everything is okay with them. Jessica holds a bag in her hands and comments that they didn't know if he would be home. Callum feels a bit awkward and questions if he should have left, but the woman says no and that she is happy he is there. But then she mentions that GRA agents are in town to investigate. The protagonist is surprised to learn that the GRA is in Winnet, even though he had already imagined that this could happen. Then Clara says she asked the other to bring her there, and hopes everything is okay. The girl suddenly hugs the wizard and thanks him for what he did for her. Callum says it's alright, but reminds the girl that for all intents and purposes, he did nothing and was never there. Jessica assures them that they understand, but they cannot simply forget everything that happened. The girls thought he wouldn't go to the coffee for a while, so they brought a snack. At that moment, the protagonist's stomach lets out a growl so loud that a motorcycle without a muffler would be envious. It seems that our wizard was indeed getting that lion's hunger. A few moments later, the young man asks them to tell him more about these GRA agents, and Jessica explains that her father encountered them in the morning. It seems that one of them is capable of talking to the dead, but couldn't get any relevant information. Callum thinks he will need to stay alert about this, but fortunately, none of the vampires understood what was happening. Clara comments that they have already searched the motel for an entire day, but she thinks they won't find anything since everything was destroyed in the fire. The protagonist thanks them for the heads up. Then Jessica tells him that Alpha Chester is afraid that the wizard's help might come with some kind of cost that they cannot handle. Our young man is just confused upon hearing the name of this Alpha while chewing his food. The youngest explains that the sheriff is the Alpha of Winnet but is below this Alpha from the west, and that helping the two of them also helps him. The wizard says he doesn't expect any kind of reward for his actions. Clara is surprised to find out that the man really won't charge anything in return. He assures them that they don't owe him anything, and that he actually prefers they don't even touch on that subject. With that, the girl smiles and promises they will stay quiet. Meanwhile, in the wreckage of the motel, Agent Ray asks if anyone there found anything interesting. Another man says he found a magical signature, but doesn't think it will be useful. The blonde questions whether the vampires were with an air mage, and the other responds that yes, and that he didn't find any more signatures around. Ray asks if there is anything else, to which the guy replies that he has a list of everything the vampires had, but it seems the items were taken from the location. He thinks the Vampire Council of Minneapolis won't like this at all, so he asks Felicia to keep an eye on those stolen items. The woman simply nods without saying a word. The agent comments that he finds this fire a bit suspicious. He kneels down and says that normally the pack would have already done the cleanup. Ray wonders why they would let the mundanes get there before them. His partner reminds him that the shapeshifters swear they had no involvement in this. The blonde believes that everyone is hiding something, and the shapeshifters are playing dumb, but he didn't buy that story. Felicia suggests that the man play the gossip and listen to their conversations, since the guy can hear anything from a kilometer away. Ray activates his power by releasing a green energy, and assures that he can indeed hear a lot, but nothing relevant to the case. In fact, the gossip about what happened is very scarce. The woman exhales smoke from her mouth as she says she could force some of them to talk, but the blonde wants to keep things friendly for now, as he doesn't want Alpha Langley to sink his teeth into his throat. For now, he wants to finish these interviews quickly, and his partner asks who the next person to be interviewed is. Looking at his phone, Ray replies that the next is a 30-year-old man named Chase Hall. Sometime later, the shadows of the two agents can be seen over a house as they knock on the door. Callum opens the door casually and asks if the person forgot something. But the two GRA members greet him, and Felicia has gills and scales like an aquatic being. The protagonist questions how he can help these people. It is then that the two identify themselves as Ray Danforth and Felicia Black, saying they are with the FBI. Our mage becomes worried as he can feel the magic emanating from them. He realizes that this magic is much stronger than that of the vampires. Ray warns that they are investigating the fire at the motel and wants to know if he can come in and ask a few questions. Callum says that this seems like the kind of thing that is better done with a lawyer. The fish woman exhales her smoke while saying that he doesn't want a lawyer. The protagonist comments that this sounds like a threat. Then the two agents exchange a suspicious glance. The blonde crouches down and asks the mage if the sheriff mentioned anything about the vampires of Winnet. Our guy looks visibly nervous but assures that he has no idea what he is talking about. Felicia says that he will tell everything he knows about the fire. Callum swears he has nothing to say, as everything he knows is what he heard from the news. Ray's eye lights up with a green glow, but the man just lets out a tired sigh and says they are leaving, as he knows nothing. With that, the two turn their backs on the protagonist. The guy thinks that was close, as it seemed the woman was trying to activate some kind of magic. Suddenly, the blonde comments that he only has one more thing to say, and finally warns him not to leave the city. That's because now the mage is officially a person of interest in this case. Despite this, some time passes and the mage thinks he needs to leave immediately. He doesn't know what kind of magic he managed to avoid from that agent, but he knows it only made him seem even more suspicious. It's only a matter of time before more GRA agents show up. The guy closes his eyes and mentally apologizes to Jessica. Remembering her and Clara, the man would like to stay and win it longer, but his survival is more important. His car accelerates down the road as he thinks that at some point they will notice he is gone. The GRA will certainly request his arrest, but as long as he stays on the back roads and keeps his spatial awareness active, he will be fine. It is then that Callum notices a red pickup truck beside him. On the vehicle's window, there is a sign announcing that it is for sale. The protagonist thinks this is the perfect opportunity and starts to maneuver. He steps on some new ground. A bald man greets him and asks how he can help. The wizard thinks this is just as he suspected. That bald man must be a shapeshifter and has the same magical signature as the Langleys. Callum says he needs a new identity and heard that he could help with that. The shapeshifter finds this a bit suspicious and questions if he knows the young man. But the protagonist simply places a gold bar on the counter and comments that he would also like to buy the pickup truck. Looking at the large piece of solid gold, The guy says he will see what he can do. 10 minutes later, he appears with a document and the key to the pickup, saying that should be enough for mundane and supernatural matters. Our wizard stares at his new identity, with the name Denver Brown. Since he is a teacher, the protagonist thinks he could use some fake glasses. Then the bald man asks if he can do anything else, and Callum says he is looking for magic books for an apprentice. The shapeshifter says he can try to find some at Pearson, but believes there isn't much of that kind there. Our young man thinks this is somewhat obvious, since the GRA monopolizes that kind of information. Getting into his new pickup, he knows he will need to stop by there the next day, as it is getting quite late. The wizard wonders if the Langleys already know he has left, and feels bad for having to flee this way. He remembers the sheriff, Jessica, and Clara, and how they were all very nice. He then decides that he needs to talk to them somehow. A few hours later, the shape-shifting bald man is organizing cans on shelves and wonders how many there should be in total. While counting all the cans, a portal opens in the wall beside him. A voice comes from this portal and asks for permission, which startles the man. This voice asks him to pass a message to the Alpha, and the poor guy asks who is speaking, but only hears the message that Clara's friend is safe. Alpha Chester received the message and tries to confirm if that is indeed the case, and the man says that is exactly what he heard. He warns them not to look for the wizard because he is a danger, and the guy says he understands. Chester talks to two wolves about this so-called friend, and questions if they have found him before. One of them says they were with Alpha Langley when the mysterious man arrived at the location. The Alpha asks if he would be able to recognize his scent, to which the wolf assures him he can. Then the elder with braids tells the wolves Roy and John that they need to find this friend at all costs. The two promise they will do that immediately. Meanwhile, Felicia is in the car with Ray and questions if the weirdo Chase is the only lead they have. The woman thinks it is impossible for him to be mundane since he is immune to her power. But the blonde says that just because he is mundane doesn't mean he isn't protected, and he might not even know it. However, the agent remembers that Chase is the most suspicious person they interviewed, and still lives near one of the mundanes who were taken by the vampires. She imagines that perhaps the vampires tried to grab him first but found his protector. Ray seems frustrated because they don't have any other leads besides this one. The two return to the house of the man named Hall and call out his name while knocking on the door. Felicia realizes that no one is home, and her partner decides to do something quick. The man releases a green energy in a spiral shape that flows from his fingers and fills the environment. They are surprised to notice that the place is completely empty. Ray comments that the place is too empty, as if no one had ever lived there. The green energy floats around the different corners of the house, and shows that there is nothing in the back either. But suddenly the blonde notices something. His power finds one of the circles under a piece of furniture, and brings the object to his feet, leaving the agent intrigued. As he picks up the circle in his hands, Felicia asks what he found. Ray explains that he isn't sure, but it looks like a type of enchantment, only it is on a piece of human metal, so the traces of magic are quite weak. The woman says that if Chase isn't a wizard, he at least knows one. Whatever happened in this place, the blonde believes that Mr. Hall won't be coming back here. Felicia says she will ask them to search and inspect the mysterious man's car. The agent examines the circle, seeming interested. Then he comments that they need to see what Alpha Langley will say about these new developments in the case. Birds sing on a sunny day in a parking lot. Callum opens his eyes upon waking. He realizes it is already afternoon, and thinks this is the first time he has slept so much in a while. All this stress is even affecting his body. But the protagonist knows that every second that passes is another opportunity for GRA to get closer to him. The wizard hopes that the bald shapeshifter did not lie about the bookstore. Our young man needs to find some research materials if he wants to stay ahead of his enemies. He looks at a small building across the street. As he approaches the bookstore, he thinks that this place seems very old, and he believes that powerful wizards do not feel much need to be modern. Callum opens the door and notices that the place smells of dust. It seems that only regular books are on the front shelves, but the protagonist notices a faint magical signature and wonders if he might be in a secret section. An elderly man holds an open book and emanates a kind of yellowish energy. So a wizard approaches and asks how things are going there. The old man does not seem very happy with the interaction and merely grunts, irritated. Then the young man realizes that he is not much of a talker. Frustrated, Callum finds only common fiction books in the place, and really bad fiction. He thinks upon seeing a very tacky cover. He imagines that wizards are not that different after all, and then he is shocked to discover that the price of the bad book is 200 reis. The protagonist does not understand why even low-quality romances have such a high price. Suddenly he finds a gray book with suspicious symbols. The title is Arcane Defenses, a dissertation on shields. Our young man believes he can spend a little more on this book. He flips through the pages filled with texts and magical symbols. Then the grumpy old man says he needs to buy it if he wants to read, since this place is not a library. Callum finds it very funny that only now does the bald man open his mouth to say something. The protagonist takes the opportunity to ask if they have any books recommended for a beginner wizard, the kind who is about to start his studies. At this, the old man comments that he is too old to be a beginner, but the man says it wouldn't be for him since he is a teacher. The grumpy man snaps his fingers and releases his energy through his hand while still holding his book. 3 books appear above his head, and Callum believes this is the power of levitation, quite different from his poor version. He is impressed with the old man's ability to do all this without much effort. The titles are his first focus: the Encyclopedia of Magical Houses of Mosey and the first edition of Portal Worlds. His hands hold the books while the bald man warns that this is all he has there. Then he asks if the man wants anything else, to which he replies that he will just take these 4 books. The total comes to just over 1,000 reis. Our wizard hands over his wad of cash, and the old man starts fiddling with his cash register. But he stops and goes back to reading his book, leaving Callum a bit confused. The grumpy man asks if he can help him with anything else. Then the protagonist says no, although he seems somewhat frustrated. It seems that old man has taken all his change. 6 hours later, a snout is sniffing around a location, and someone asks if another person found anything. The wolf replies that he cannot sense any residue of magic, and the other comments that he cannot either, but it will be difficult to mask the smell. It is weak but noticeable that he has been there. One of them questions whether they should ask the employee if he saw anyone with the same description, but his colleague says they need to be discreet, since if the alpha sent only the 2 of them, it is because he does not want any scandal. At night, it can be seen that the parking lot is full of a purple residue. One of the wolves says that the man had parked there and was probably in a pickup truck. He can ask a favor from his old mundane contacts to check the security camera footage. His friend says it would be better to get Lucy's opinion before doing that. A mysterious girl is sucking on a lollipop. She is sitting in a place full of technological equipment, and it seems that hacking is her specialty. Now in another place, Callum arrives with his red pickup truck. The protagonist thinks that the books were a waste of time. He did manage to get 1 or 2 pieces of information from them. He learned that the ceramic plate he found in the vampire's nest was probably the focus of a wizard, which helps simplify the process of more complex spells. But he did not find any information on how to make or where to buy such a thing. But he cannot give up, for there must be a book somewhere that teaches something useful. The young man needs to find another store because he really wants to learn. But that old man left him very angry, as he showed no manners at all. A few days later, the sun shines in the sky over a commercial street, while Callum thinks about how he has already encountered vampires, shapeshifters, and other wizards. He even found a fey shop that sells crystals and herbs, although he is not very interested in that kind of thing. But he did not find any more dragon children. The protagonist wonders if Shahe was really some kind of rare species, and he hopes that the man made it out of that situation alive. Life has been passing very quickly since that moment, so he hasn't had much opportunity to look into it further. Who knows what he will find out there, since the media certainly wouldn't cover a fire caused by a dragon. Callum arrives at a bookstore and thinks that this place has potential. He opens the door looking carefree, but then he notices a strong blue energy that fills the entire place. The wizard is surprised and notes that this is a lot of magic indeed. This magic seems to come from a simple girl who is looking at some books. Callum looks at the girl surrounded by strong blue magic and questions who she is. The young man thinks that this girl looks like a college student, and then he realizes that besides her, there are 2 more magical signatures in this bookstore. It seems that an elderly couple sitting nearby are also wizards. The man tries to relax, remembering that no one in that place knows he has become a rebel. At that moment, the elderly woman notices his presence and looks in his direction. Callum gets nervous and wonders why the hell the old lady is staring. But the lady just smiles and gives a little wave. He smiles back and realizes that she is just a friendly person. The magical section of this store seems much better than the other one. But some of these books are familiar, so there may not be that many options. The protagonist hears some whispers and becomes intrigued. The powerful girl whispers a few things while reading a book. Then he hears someone chuckle and say they didn't understand much of the book they are reading, The Arcane Defenses. Callum comments that he doesn't know who the target audience is, but he thinks at least half of those words were made up. The girl laughs and says she thought she was the only one struggling, as she has spent the whole day trying to understand that damn book. The protagonist would like to help, but he wasted a lot of time looking for books for beginner wizards until he realized there aren't any around. She asks if the man has an apprentice. Our wizard says it's more or less that, and questions if the girl is an apprentice too. Actually, she is trying to skip the apprentice phase, as she doesn't like Archmage Fane, who wants to be her tutor. The young man thinks that if an Archmage is trying to associate with the girl, she must be someone important. He asks how to skip the apprentice phase, and the girl explains that she just needs to finish her project on her own. This is easier for healers, but they still need some basic things like shields. Callum finds this interesting and introduces himself as Professor Denver Brown, saying it's a pleasure to meet her. The girl is surprised to meet a professor, and then tells him her name is Gale Hargrave. Our wizard suggests collaborating if he has time, and she comments that she does since no one counts on healers, so he asks if she has a list of what she needs. Some time passes, and the two are sitting in the library while the protagonist analyzes a book. She has to learn about focuses, telekinesis, charms, and enchantments. The false professor believes this makes a lot of sense. Gale says yes but seems tired, and Callum suggests attack spells since she should be able to cast some powerful attacks as a healer. The girl is confused since her power is about healing and not damage, but the young man explains that it depends on how it is applied and asks if she went to medical school. She explains that she had a magical education and not a mundane one, so she didn't go to college. Her parents put her in the best school of all, which is somewhat outdated but is where all the most important families go. With that, the protagonist realizes he is talking to a Nepo baby. He decides to skip this part about attacks for now, but he asks the girl to research about clot attacks and neurochemicals when she has some spare time. Callum says he doesn't know much about how healing magic works, but he imagines that if she focuses on just one thing and then amplifies it, it will affect the balance of everything else. Gale finds this theory very interesting, and she says it would be very useful, which makes the wizard happy to have helped in some way. He closes the book because it is getting late and thinks they should stop right there. The girl then places her hand over his and asks if they can meet again next Friday, since the professor was a great help. The protagonist seems a bit nervous, but says he will see what he can do. The next day, Callum drives his pickup truck while thinking he was very lucky to find a young mage. Now he can study various topics of magic under the pretense of helping. It's not like he wouldn't help anyway, since Gale is a nice girl. Thinking about it, maybe he should check another store to look for other things the girl will need. Now the wizard is in front of a counter holding some books. A woman with a magical aura greets him and asks if he is only taking those 2 books. The young man notices she seems like a shapeshifter, but just says yes and that they are basic reading for his student. The employee places the items in a bag, and then questions if he really found everything he needs, looking at the man with a suspicious gaze. Callum is surprised and freezes for a moment, but then he says he did find what he needs. The woman comments that they have other shelves back there if he wants to take another look. The protagonist laughs and says that actually he is late for an appointment. She smiles and says she completely understands. Then she wishes him a good day as the wizard turns to leave. Already outside, he imagines that this woman knows something and thinks he needs to get out of there. Our young man thinks he made a mistake by deciding to spend extra time in that place. Helping that girl could end up costing him a lot. Callum starts to think he needs to be quick, but then notices a small piece of paper hidden inside one of the books. He wonders what it is as he reaches out to grab it. The protagonist carefully pulls out the paper and holds something that looks like a note. On this note is the name of the Alpha Chester, a request for him to call and a phone number. Elsewhere, Lucy tells Alpha Chester that her boys did the right thing by getting in touch, since security cameras are easy for her. The man asks if she found him, and the girl says that finding him was the easiest part. She managed to get recordings that show his location in just a few hours, but knowing where the guy was would only keep them one step behind. The really important question is where he would be going. Chester gets irritated and asks the girl to get straight to the point, and she says she is getting there. Lucy says her boys did most of the dirty work by interrogating the staff at the places he went, and it seems the guy loves a bookstore. Then the girl hacked the cameras at all the main exits of the city, and eventually realized he was heading south. The lens of a camera reflects the image of the red pickup truck. With that, the hacker summarizes the story by saying that Roy made a list of the most likely places the man could stop, and then they found his image on a store's camera. The Alpha asks where that is, and Lucy explains that Professor Denver Brown was located in a shapeshifter bookstore, and the boys are already on their way there. Chester says they cannot interact because Mr. Brown should be the one looking for them, not the other way around. The girl says he will manage. Now Callum is standing near a phone booth and wonders what is wrong with him. The young man can hardly believe he is actually considering calling Alpha Chester, and then thinks he must have gone crazy, as that is the only explanation. If the wolf was able to track his movements, it must be because he is doing something wrong. Calling the number on the note will at least clarify his next step. It is then that a phone starts to ring. The Alpha answers and thanks Mr. Brown for calling, but he asks if he shouldn't call him Mr. Hall, which irritates the protagonist and makes him question what he wants with him. Chester explains that he needs to thank him for saving Clara, but when it is not the only territory being taken over by vampires. Callum says he is not a mercenary, but the other retorts that he has no idea what he is. The wolf knows how to recognize a potential resource and offers to clear his name from all GRA documents in exchange for his help. Our guy says that money isn't a problem, but information would be quite useful, especially about wizards and their societies. The Alpha comments that he can already consider it done, since he has access to a wizard specialist and can arrange 1 or 2 meetings between the two. Then the protagonist asks for an explanation about this so-called job. Chester explains that 4 shapeshifter cities are being attacked by vampires, which is a political abuse to diminish their influence. The wizard questions whether it really is 4 cities and thinks that he might not be ready for a massacre of this level. There is no guarantee that he could use the same trick again. Callum was lucky the first time, as the GRA agents were very close to catching him for good. The guy asks if there is a deadline, and the Alpha questions whether that means he is willing to take on the job. Then the protagonist replies that he can schedule a time with the specialist, but he needs to know how he was found. Chester says he set his trackers to follow his scent some time ago, but they probably wouldn't have found anything if he hadn't entered every bookstore on his way south. Callum feels frustrated for being so predictable. The trackers left some things in a trash can at the end of the street, and there are all the necessary details about the vampires. Our protagonist warns that he will inform his decision soon, and the alpha says he understands. Sometime later, the wizard is in his pickup truck holding the package, thinking it looks more like an encyclopedia. It seems that Alpha Chester is a very well-informed man, at the very least, but he would have to drive over 1,000 kilometers between some of these cities, which cannot be done quickly. It is then that Callum has an idea. Teleporting himself is possible, but there is a limit of 15 meters. However, there is no speed limit for gravity telekinesis. The wizard has never tried this before, but he thinks it should work if his theory is correct. His body is enveloped in a bright purple energy, and his feet stop touching the ground. The protagonist gets excited when he realizes he is levitating, but then he loses his balance a bit and lets out a scream. It seems that this ability is somewhat difficult to control. Suddenly, the man starts moving in the air, and his body crashes hard against the trunk of a tree. Callum falls to the ground with a frustrated expression. This should work in the future, but for now, the guy needs something to help him stabilize. That's when he remembers something that might work perfectly. Meanwhile, the two GRA agents arrive on the road, and Ray is using his power. Felicia asks if the man found anything. The blonde says there is something ahead and tells her to check the ditch. They walk through the grass, and the woman thinks this is it. Her partner comments that it was a good hiding spot, considering the situation. Fallen below them in the ravine is Callum's old car. Felicia opens one of the doors and notices that the car has also been cleaned out and emptied. Ray says it hasn't been there long and questions whether she knows what that means. The man smiles sinisterly as he says they are getting closer and closer. A motorcycle makes noise as it accelerates down the road. The protagonist rides with a helmet and thinks that now he needs to take one more step. At that moment, he uses his power, which seems to envelop the vehicle. The motorcycle becomes much faster, and the wizard celebrates his success. Callum used gravity telekinesis on the motorcycle. This should help him move through the shapeshifter cities with plenty of speed. Now that the transportation issue has been resolved, he will take a look at one of the nests to know exactly what he is dealing with. The protagonist parks next to some trees and imagines this is the spot. Chester provided the contact information for all the local alphas, but it would be smarter to avoid any kind of interaction. Callum uses his power, thinking that now he just needs to find the vampire's nest. If the information in the package is correct, he has an idea of where it might be. Suddenly, the guy turns his head and seems to have found what he is looking for. His spatial sense shows the city cinema. He can count 9 magical signatures of vampires, and apparently they have teamed up with a wizard from the land as well, since he notices shields protecting the entire area. But the shields only protect the ground, so he will be able to dodge the defenses if he doesn't step inside. The biggest problem will be dealing with the wizard himself. His magical bubble seems complex, and he would even like some shields of that kind, but it would be impossible to use a vacuum enchantment with that. Callum thinks that maybe this job will bring some problems that aren't worth it, and he considers declining Alpha Chester's offer. Suddenly, he sees strange movement from a man with a red aura. His eyes widen in surprise, and the young man wonders what the hell that is. A 10th vampire appears on the scene, making the wizard think he must have arrived at the speed of a bullet since he hadn't noticed his presence before. Since his attack on Winnet was stealthy, the protagonist had never seen a vampire's real speed. Callum finds this ability somewhat frightening. Then he notices that one of them is dragging something, and he questions what it could be. He is horrified to discover what it is. The vampire is dragging a child, who is all beaten up. Our young man becomes furious and concludes that vampires are indeed monsters, but that wizard is just as bad as they are. The protagonist cannot allow these damned creatures to continue with this. He sends a message confirming that he will take the job. His motorcycle speeds past the cars while the wizard thinks he will need a different strategy. It has to be something very quick and precise, and he also cannot leave any trace that would lead the GRA agents to him. Callum decides he needs to think this through better, and his phone vibrates. The young man realizes he is late when he sees that it is already 7:45 in the morning. Back at the bookstore, he is sitting with Gail again, and she says she understands. The fake professor asks to see the plate full of symbols that is in her hands, and then he says it really looks like a great focus for telekinesis, observing the material. He praises her well-done work. The girl thanks him for bringing so much extra material, as she must have gone through a dozen plates to get the drawings right. The wizard suggests trying out the focus. Gail holds the plate and says she will give it a try. Her expression looks quite determined. Then the blue energy begins to flow through her hands, and with that it envelopes all the material. The girl questions if it is really working. Callum tells her she needs to keep doing what she is doing. That's when her power seems to increase even more, and the blue energy also passes over the book on the table, causing it to start levitating. The two celebrate her success, happy that they have managed it. Gail gets up from her chair and hugs the protagonist, thanking her teacher Brown. He feels a bit embarrassed and tells her not to thank him yet, as this was just the first step and there is still much work to do. But the girl complains, telling him not to be a party pooper. Callum decides this is a good moment to wrap up their activities for the day and asks if they will meet again next week. The girl smiles and confirms her presence. Now the protagonist is on his motorcycle and thinks he still has a few hours left. He knows he will need more materials, but he thinks he already has an idea of how he will deal with the vampire nest. The light turns green as he thinks about what will happen if everything goes as planned. And if everything goes right, at this same time the next day, the vampires won't even know what hit them. Callum doesn't want this to resemble the motel incident, so he won't use weapons, but he can think of something as powerful as bullets. Termite is a mixture of metal oxide and aluminum. Its most common use is for welding train tracks. This substance can burn at up to 20,000 degrees Celsius, which is twice as hot as lava, and more than enough to melt a vampire's ugly face. Producing this material is simple, and it can be done with common items found at home. A bit of rust from an old pipe, and aluminum foil crushed into powder. Now it needs to be mixed well, in a specific proportion, and put everything inside an old soda can. So congratulations, you just produced a homemade grenade. An hour later, the protagonist already has several cans ready, and he will hide his materials in places to avoid wasting more time moving around. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, now the wizard just needs to find some kind of heavy object. He looks back and sees a huge rock. It seems like this will work well. In the cinema, two people are watching a non-romantic vampire movie, and one of them comments that it's horrible. A vampire asks if they still have any ketchup from that kid, and the other replies that they don't because they've taken everything. The guy with the bun wants to know whose turn it is to hunt now. Just as the other was about to give his answer, a small portal opens, and a soda can appears through it. Suddenly, a large explosion engulfs the place, turning the vampires into skewers. The fire alarm goes off, and water starts dripping from the ceiling. Other vampires wonder what the hell is happening. The one with spiky hair tries to find out if there's a fire nearby, but another portal opens above him. Then his colleague tries to warn him, while the can is already falling. Another explosion occurs, and those two also become mosquito barbecue. Callum realizes that his plan is working. He activates his power, and thinks he needs to continue the attack. His purple energy starts opening portals beneath several cans at the same time. The protagonist cannot allow the vampires even a second to think. Our guy seems determined as more explosions happen throughout the cinema. One of the bloodsuckers starts questioning who could be doing this. Meanwhile, the wizard watches the movie from the broadcast room and finds the story incredible. But he becomes worried when he notices an alarm ringing and smoke entering the place. The bald man realizes they are under attack. He sees the flames and questions why none of his shields have been activated. And Callum thinks that the Earth Wizard has started to move, so it's time for the secondary attack. Our protagonist still knows very little about a wizard's capabilities. It's possible that neither termites nor bullets can penetrate such a thick shield. But that is his only option. Supernatural or not, this wizard is still human. Therefore, his reaction time is the same as an ordinary person. Wrapping the large stone with his energy, the guy thinks about what might happen if he teleports such a heavy object in the air, and then creates a portal just before it hits the ground. While the Earth Wizard thinks he needs to find something, Callum's portal opens above his head. The man looks up just as the stone is heading in his direction. It's at that moment that it falls with a crash, and something seems to break. The protagonist concludes his thought that the object will fall with enough force and speed that even the shields won't be able to save him. The enormous stone can be seen lying on the ground, while flames engulf the area. Our wizard believes he has taken out everyone in that cinema. Returning to his motorcycle, he thinks he has destroyed one nest but still has 3 left. Another hour passes, and Callum faces another building that is on fire. He drinks a soda to cool off, knowing that his enemies didn't stand a chance. Back in the computer room, Alpha Chester asks if the vampires have reacted in any way. Lucy holds her lollipop and replies that they haven't, and it seems the boy is doing a clean job. Seeing the phone vibrate on the table, the wolf questions whether another update has arrived. The message says that 2 nests have already been destroyed. The old man with braids wonders how this is possible. Elsewhere, Callum is ready to ride his motorcycle again and approach the 3rd target. He wonders how many vampires he will have to defeat. The boy manages to identify 12 of them, along with a wizard with very strong shields. But then he realizes there's something else there. The protagonist can sense the presence of 2 different figures and doesn't think they are supernatural beings. They are 2 humans being held as prisoners. Callum wonders how he will manage to get them out without revealing himself and ruining everything. Callum paces back and forth, thinking about what he can do. Taking both of them could end up compromising his identity. But the wizard can't just leave them there, and if he rescues them, he needs to take them to a place where the shapeshifters can reach quickly. The boy uses his spatial sense and discovers there's a fast food restaurant a few blocks away. He can leave the couple there, but then he tries to think about what his first steps will be. Callum knows he needs to destroy this nest. Our wizard knows he can't waste time and needs to locate the weak points of his target. He finds the spots with the highest number of vampires, and the places with the most flammable materials. So he crosses his arms confidently upon finding the perfect strategy. His next step is to prepare the cans with termite. 6 bombs should be enough for his objective. And now all he needs is a little portal magic. The cans begin to tremble as the wizard's power envelopes them, and then they fall to the ground, causing more deadly explosions. The human man asks if his friend heard a noise, and she tries to understand what is happening. He realizes that the noise is coming from the fire alarm, which means something must be on fire nearby. Smoke starts to descend the stairs towards them, and they know they need to find a way out. The young man tries to break the bars of the cell, but a portal opens in the wall behind him. He is complaining about how he can't open the gate when someone appears from behind. Callum has his face covered by a black mask and asks if the humans are okay. The two are startled and want to know who this suspicious man is. Our protagonist simply tells them to turn their faces forward and keep their eyes closed. The wizard breaks the chains that were holding them and says he will get them out, but they need to trust him. Seeing their shackles disappear, the humans are surprised. They then decide to trust the mysterious man. A portal opens in the ground beneath them just as the boy was about to ask where they were going. He finishes his question as another portal opens in the ceiling of an empty room. That's when the two fall to the ground, and Callum apologizes for that. The protagonist warns that they are in a bathroom and should wait there because someone will come to rescue them. The girl asks if he is really going to leave, and the boy says they don't even know his name. Our wizard creates another portal to leave and simply says he is nobody, and they should forget they ever heard his voice. The girl wants to know at least how long they should wait there, but Callum comments that he can't answer anything else and just wishes them good luck. Arriving at another location, the protagonist feels bad for those two and for not answering their questions. He remembers how he was in a similar situation when he discovered everything related to his powers. So he hopes he can trust Alpha Chester to take care of them and thinks about checking if the two are okay after he finishes the job. But a message from the wolf warns to cancel the fourth attack since the vampires have surrendered, and the wizard realizes they have finally taken action. Callum almost feels relieved to know this. The protagonist ran several simulations to ensure everything would go smoothly, but spending so much vis is very tiring. His accuracy would certainly have decreased if he had to destroy one more nest. Despite everything, it turned out to be worth it, not just for the deal he made with Alpha Chester, but also because two innocent people can live another day. A few minutes earlier, the Alpha is in the room with Lucy and another man, questioning how the young man is capable of doing all this. The suspicious guy comments that he must have access to the GRA's teleportation system, and if not that, it must have something to do with the phase. He says that the magic of the phase is different from his, and largely remains a mystery. Chester asks Lucy if she has any ideas as well, and the girl says the protagonist knows how to limit his cell phone use very well. She tried to track him but found nothing useful, and apologizes to the boss for not having more information. The big wolf wonders what he could do if he could move his men at the same speed that Callum moves, but the gray-haired man doubts he would reveal his methods. The Alpha thinks that maybe they could offer something more valuable than just a few lessons with this Jasper guy. Then Lucy comments that he doesn't seem to have any allies who work with computers, and maybe he would accept the help of a tech girl. Chester questions if she is offering to do such a thing and says he wouldn't ask her to commit even more, considering her situation with the GRA. The girl explains that she can even work with the guild, but they don't pay much attention to those who aren't wizards, so she can be counted on. At that moment, the cell phone starts to vibrate. The big wolf says it's right on time and answers the phone saying Chester is on the line. A vampire dressed like Dracula warns that they can stop the attacks now, and the Alpha greets his friend Antoine. The leech complains that these attacks on the nests are a violation of the treaty, and the GRA will not like this at all. But the wolf assures that he has no idea what he is talking about, since none of his shapeshifters have come near the vampire nests. Antoine says he is backing off and leaving his territory, so the attacks can stop now. Chester is happy to hear this. The mosquito says this is not the end of the story, and he doesn't know who is behind this but will take action when he finds out. Callum rides down the road on his motorcycle, while the vampire comments that the one responsible for the attacks would prefer the GRA to catch him first. The two agents analyze the fire scene and realize that the culprit did a hell of a job. Felicia asks her partner if he thinks it was the same guy as before. Ray brushes some ashes off the ground and replies that he is sure it was indeed the same person. The methods used this time were different, but the precision is downright frightening. Whoever this guy is, he is becoming increasingly dangerous. A man in protective gear shouts that he found something. The blonde seems pleased as he picks the object up in his hands. He believes this circle is the signature of the culprit. Ray still doesn't know what this is for, but this is definitely his calling card. Suddenly, Felicia touches her colleague's suit, and he is caught off guard. The blonde asks the other man to leave the area because his partner cannot speak in front of others, and the guy complies. Sometimes the agent forgets that other mages are immune to his siren abilities, and then he asks what she thinks about this. The woman believes that the attack on the first nest was a crime of passion. She thinks the vampires kidnapped someone the culprit cared about. Then he used a weapon because it was the quickest and easiest option. But she holds a package with a leftover soda can and thinks that this was already another story. Ray understands that this job involved a lot of preparation. Felicia thinks they should talk to Alpha Chester, since all the attacks happened in vampire nests that were in his territories. The siren believes they should speak not only with the Alpha but also with Antoine Levine, and maybe even with Ravab, the king of the Fae in that region. The blonde thinks the Fae might have important information, considering the unique style of this assassin. Now in another place, Alpha Chester welcomes the agents and tells them to sit down. Ray thanks him and comments that he must already know why they are there. The wolf says he does know, and it is because of the terrible incident with Levine's vampires. Chester knows they have had problems but assures that it had nothing to do with this, and any issues with Levine will be resolved according to GRA rules. The agent seems suspicious upon noticing that this was very well rehearsed. He hopes the Alpha doesn't mind answering a few questions, since this is just standard procedure. At that moment, a cell phone starts vibrating again. The wolf picks up the device and asks for permission. Then he answers the call saying he will have to call back another time because he is dealing with some visitors now. He quickly hangs up his cell phone and returns to his seat, asking the agent to continue. Ray seems to find this a bit suspicious but just agrees. Meanwhile, Callum is all irritated with the Alpha for hanging up on him. An hour later, the protagonist puts some things away in a locker and tries to remember that it is number 4. He spread what he took from the nest across different places, but everything can be easily retrieved with teleportation. If the mage is captured in the middle of the street, at least he won't be carrying a bunch of evidence. It is then that his cell phone vibrates, and the young man says it was about time. Chester recounts that he called just when the GRA agents arrived, and they did not seem happy at all with the scenes Callum left behind. The mage asks what the Alpha thought of his work. He replies that his work was simply exemplary. The protagonist confirms if this means he was not reported to the GRA. Chester assures that he did not do that. The agents did not like his lack of answers, but he thinks the two have no leads. However, the Alpha also comments that if Callum's identity is discovered, he cannot do anything about it, and the young man already imagined that would be the case. Regarding payment, the wolf says he needs to introduce him to 2 people, and Lucy seems quite excited. One of these people is the wizard expert I mentioned earlier, and Chester says he can call him Harry. The other is an information technology specialist, and she wants to be called Trocadinho. Our guy realizes that someone there has a sense of humor, and asks if Trocadinho is the one who ensures these calls aren't recorded. Lucy grabs the phone to say that it's her, and she mentions that she's a big fan of how Callum destroys things. She imagined that the protagonist might appreciate some help with the electronic side of things. The wizard even acknowledges that this is true but reminds her that the girl already works for Chester. Our Trocadinho explains that she actually does some work for the Alpha, but he isn't her real boss. The guy isn't sure if he can trust her, but he also thinks she would be a good help. He asks the girl to send a message with her number since he still needs to think about it. Lucy makes a face at the old man while asking if he's jealous, but Chester doesn't give much attention to the joke. Another person takes the phone from the hacker's hand, telling her to stop flirting. Jasper questions whether Callum really wants to know more about wizards. He mentions that he got ahead of himself and scanned some grimoires. Then he says that Trocadinho will send the files and her contact information. The protagonist comments that this would be great and thanks the specialist. Jasper hands the phone back to Alpha Chester. The wolf says he needs to mention a small detail before hanging up. Antoine Levine is the master of Minneapolis and is a vengeful man, so it's very important that Callum doesn't get captured by him. This man is simply the most dangerous vampire the Alpha knows. The protagonist is studying Chester's wizard grimoires and thinks about how incredible they are. They are all handwritten, and their research was done personally. They are nothing like the materials one can find in a regular bookstore, but it seems that spatial magic is a mystery to everyone, as there is hardly any information about it. Callum notices that it's getting dark and decides to call Trocadinho. Lucy is typing on her huge computer. A call from Mr. Brown pops up on her screen, and she is surprised to see the man calling so soon. The girl is wearing a Nir Brahma band shirt, and holds her phone while thinking that the guy must really like her. She asks if the boy will accept her offer, and the protagonist says he has a job he can do but needs to know how much it would cost. Trocadinho says her night costs 50 reis, and the wizard feels a bit embarrassed. Wow. But the girl says she was joking and can even send the price list she uses with Chester, but it really depends on how interesting the job is. Being a mundane in the middle of a supernatural world means she does a lot of boring tasks. Callum finds it strange that she is mundane, as he thought she was a shapeshifter too. Lucy explains that her parents were wizards, but she didn't inherit their charm, so she's just a mundane. The protagonist's phone beeps with a notification, and the girl says she sent a message with her price list. He notices the name Lucille Harper and thinks she accidentally revealed her identity. But the girl comments that Trocadinho's joke would lose its charm, and if Chester can't protect her, it means she's in trouble anyway. Thinking about the two agents, she explains that a fake name isn't enough to stop the GRA. Callum is surprised to learn how much Lucy trusts the Alpha and didn't imagine he had so much power since he needed her help so much. Our Trocadinho laughs and promises not to tell what he said to the wolf. She mentions that Chester is practically royalty, who could take the lives of a dozen people and all he would get for it is a pat on the back. Unless it was an archmage or master vampire, the girl imagines. The guy ponders for a moment, and then says that this Antoine Levine must be a big problem, since master vampires are so important. When the Alpha warned him about the master, the protagonist wasn't that worried at first. But if the bloodsucker is on the same level as an archmage, that means he will need to be careful. Callum starts to say something to Lucille and is interrupted to be told to call her Lucy, then asks for information about the couple he rescued from the nest. The girl types a few things and then asks if he is talking about the people he left in the fast food bathroom. She didn't want to say it, but their situation doesn't look good, since they ended up in the hands of the GRA. The protagonist gets angry and thinks he shouldn't have left that responsibility to someone else. But Lucy promises that she will find more information and already asks what the payment will be. The wizard says he can leave some gold in a specific location as an advance and asks if 2 kilos is enough. Trocadinho gets all happy and says that Callum just bought the best night of his life. Look at that. Our guy turns red again and thinks that this girl is quite strange. Now the next day, in that same bookstore, Gale is using her power impressively, and the protagonist tells her to keep going because it's amazing. The girl looks at the bluish energy on the plate and is fascinated. That nice lady even closes her eyes because of the bright light. And then she tries to get the attention of the 2 nerds who are too busy with their studies. Callum realizes they might be bothering her and comments that it's better to tone it down. Gale asks Professor Brown where he found that enchantment, as she has always struggled with the light spell. The wizard replies that he borrowed some great books from a friend of a friend. The girl asks him to thank that acquaintance for her and mentions that the telekinesis focus is working very well too. Then the guy asks how her healing experiments are going, and he wants to know if she researched the attack skills she mentioned the other day. Gale says she took a look and managed to hurt some crickets using an asymmetrical structure with circulation inversion. Callum pretends to understand, but in reality, he feels like she just spoke Greek. While the girl continues talking about her nerdy stuff, the protagonist thinks that sometimes he feels a bit dumb when talking to her. Our guy knows he started learning magic very late, but it's impressive to see how a young mage with good training learns everything so quickly, and he thinks Gale is simply amazing. But then the girl tells how one of the crickets touched her finger, and she let out a scream, which makes Callum wonder if she might not be that amazing after all. Now in another mysterious place, a very important meeting has just begun. Chester is irritated that they scheduled this meeting at night specifically because of one person, who is still late. A gray-haired, bearded man says he is sure that the man will arrive shortly. The alpha says it's better that he arrives soon, and then a person in red shoes approaches. Our wolf comments that the idea was his, and a pale hand grips the golden doorknob. It is Antoine Levine, the master of the vampires of Minneapolis. Alpha Chester is the leader of the shapeshifters of the Midwest, and makes a sarcastic remark that the man finally decided to show up. Suddenly, one can see the vampire's vision turning red as if he were furious. Antoine quickly reaches the table and tells the mutt to be careful with what he says. He hisses like a cat, and Chester responds with a deep growl. At that moment, a hand slams on the table forcefully, and someone shouts that it's time to end this little show. King Rav rules the Fae of the Midwest and tells them to start the meeting already. Then the alpha agrees with him and settles into his chair. The master also agrees. It is at this moment that the representative of the GRA, Archmage Janry, declares the start of the meeting with the authority of his Archmage status. The wizard stares at the 4 leaders present and tells the gentleman that there is a killer among them, which means it's time to act. Meanwhile, Callum is on his motorcycle in the middle of the road and says it's been a while. Then he looks at the city sign of Winnet, saying hello to the place. His house still looks decent, and he is surprised that the GRA hasn't destroyed everything with their investigation. The protagonist wonders if he should thank the Langleys for that. Maybe they scared the GRA away in case he returned one day. Our wizard sees his hidden bags under the floor with his spatial sense, and he uses his powers to retrieve the 2 bags. All the money and gold are there just as he had left them before. The protagonist took as much gold as he could carry, but still had to leave some behind. Now he has the advance from Lucy and all the material costs of magic piling up, so getting a bit more will be quite useful. Callum has already grabbed everything he needs, and now the smartest thing to do is to get out of there. He only intends to leave the city without saying goodbye to anyone. Despite this, a few minutes later, the fool is already hiding near a house and wonders what the hell he is doing. Our wizard tries to convince himself to just take a quick look from afar to make sure everyone is okay and then leave. His spatial sense identifies that the whole family is in the kitchen. Inside the place, Jessica asks Clara to grab another pack of steaks from the freezer. The girl smiles and says she will do that right away. Arthur notices that his niece seems happy and asks his daughter if the girl still has those nightmares. Jessica replies that yes, but it seems that being under the charm of the vampires erased most of her memory. If it weren't for that, the trauma would be even worse. The sheriff says they are lucky to have gotten her back so quickly. The blonde remembers how Callum carried out the entire rescue, and then she says that it was actually much more than just luck. Suddenly, the girl smells something different, and she asks her father if he is feeling it too. Jessica quickly opens the door, almost desperately. The two can only see a motorcycle in the distance, and Arthur asks if that is who he thinks it is, to which the blonde replies that she doesn't know. Callum moves at high speed and thinks that was close. He needs to stay away to keep them safe. Otherwise, it would just be a matter of time before the GRA shows up again. The protagonist's motorcycle speeds down the street, and a voice on the phone asks if he wants the locations of all the GRA's teleportation circles. The young man asks if that would be a problem. Lucy replies that not necessarily, but she was surprised to learn that Callum doesn't know this, as they thought that was how he moved around. The wizard says it would make sense, but that's not the case, and the Nirbrahma fan warns that she is sending a message with the information that is already public. However, she explains that many important families have their own teleportation circles, so finding data about those will be more complicated. The protagonist finds the idea of important families quite interesting. At the moment, his teleportation range is 15 meters, but through a magic circle, the GRA can do the same over thousands of kilometers. And it happens that only one of those circles is located behind a mattress store. The magical world really hides right under our noses. Our young man needs to be quick because the GRA has heavy security around its portal circles, so his movement options are limited. Gravity telekinesis works well with his motorcycle, but it leaves traces of his magical signature everywhere. This signature usually fades quickly, but Jessica managed to sense it, and if that happened with a GRA agent, he would be in trouble. An improved form of teleportation is the best option to escape problems, and if he figures out how the GRA makes its circles work, he will never get caught. Callum can see the teleportation circle glowing with his spatial sense. This is going to be quite complicated if he can't get closer. Perhaps the detail is too complex, and he may not be able to understand everything he needs through his spatial sense. A geometric shape that looks like a die floats in the air, surrounded by rings. Normally, everything can be done by engraving some symbols on a type of plate, but this magic will require a true construction. Well, the protagonist knows there is no reason to delay this. He opens a portal and decides to start the work. Now in the room where that important meeting is taking place, Chester questions whether the others really believe that the one responsible for the attacks was a murderer. Antoine says yes, and that it would be a murderer working for the shapeshifters. The Alpha bangs on the table and warns that he will not accept unfounded accusations. Then the Master of the Vampires wants to know if this was some kind of threat. He asks the Archmage Janri not to let the logo speak, as it contributes nothing to this discussion. Rabib says this is not a discussion but a tantrum, and he hopes the leech does not accuse the Fays in the same way he accuses the shapeshifters. The mosquito gets irritated and hisses once again. Janri says that the incidents of the nests are being investigated, but the shapeshifters are no longer suspects, and he warns that this meeting should not serve as a way to increase rivalry between their groups. They are there to discuss the actions of an extremely dangerous murderer. Even though the only targets so far have been vampires, it does not mean it will continue this way, and the GRA considers this murder a threat to everyone. Antoine comments that if the shapeshifters are really not guilty, then the old man must have some clue. The wizard says that the evidence they have so far is limited, but seems accurate. Chester questions what the man meant by evidence. Janri puts his hand inside his robe to retrieve something. He then asks if any of them recognize this object, which is a small metal circle. Now Callum is on his motorcycle, and thinks that if Gail's family is important, she must arrive at her weekly classes through a teleportation circle. The girl doesn't seem like the type to take the bus. According to the information Lucy sent, the protagonist imagines where the nearest circle to the bookstore might be, and realizes it would be in a fancy jewelry store. Our young man finds this somewhat ironic. The appearance of this circle is quite similar to the one he saw before, and the wizard wonders if they are all like that. Callum managed to make a replica using a computer program, but has no way of knowing if the details are correct without looking more closely. And even if everything is right, he still has no idea how he would go about building something like that. Suddenly the protagonist notices someone is coming, and imagines it is her. Purple energy spirals around the glowing core. The rings around it begin to spin, and someone steps out of the portal. Gale appears on the scene, still enveloped by the magic of the circle. The young man notices that the energy responds to the girl's tattoo. This makes sense, as if a wizard's tattoo is something unique, then it can determine if the person has the necessary authority to use the circle. Perhaps it is even possible to observe where a wizard is going and where they came from, which wouldn't be a surprise since the GRA can be quite invasive. Callum feels frustrated because he really wanted to take a closer look. Sometime later, Gale asks a man at the bookstore if he has seen Professor Brown anywhere, and he replies no. The girl finds this strange, as the professor usually arrives earlier than she does. Then the protagonist appears from behind a shelf saying he is there, and apologizes for looking at some books. Gale almost believed the man had forgotten about her. The traces of a portal begin to disappear beside him, and the young man feels relieved, as it was close. Our wizard got so busy following the girl that he even forgot she was on her way to meet him. Callum asks what they will study today, and she says she needs to understand something about movement magic. The protagonist believes this is somewhat complicated, as nothing about healing can be applied to movement. Gale says she knows that and wanted to be an elemental mage, because then at least half of those requirements would be much easier. Our wizard remembers having gone through the same frustration when he started studying magic, and thinks that the space circles he created were useless. He also recalls when the other mage was shocked by what he was trying to do, and how everything changed when he added a bit of fire magic. Then the girl asks if the professor knows anything about movement magic, since he is a gravity mage. Callum knew this moment would come, but feels nervous anyway. It's true that he understood the basics of gravity telekinesis, but he knows he is not at the level of a real wizard. Gale asks him to show a spell, and the protagonist thinks that his identity will be compromised if he doesn't perform as well as he should. Despite this, the wizard says he can do a simpler trick. He uses his power to alter the gravity around the chair. Then the object begins to float. The young man says there it is, just a little levitation. Callum states that this is only a small part of what he can do and that if he had rested, he could show something better, but the girl found it amazing. The protagonist is surprised to hear this and questions if it is really true. His apprentice simply nods to confirm, and asks if he can teach her that trick. Our wizard says he can try, and thinks he can camouflage himself better than he imagined. An hour later, the young man presents a book that was the first he read as a beginner. This book is a bit complex but teaches the concepts very well. Gale asks if he will learn to fly after he finishes reading, and the teacher tells him not to get too excited. At that moment, his phone starts to vibrate. Callum wonders why Lucy is calling right now, and the student wants to know if everything is okay. He apologizes for needing to answer, but assures her it's nothing serious. On the other end of the line, our Trocadinho asks if she called at a bad time. The protagonist replies that she did not, and wants to know how she is. Lucy says he is very sweet for worrying, and the wizard tells her to get straight to the point. The hacker shares that she has news about the two mundanes who were rescued, and it's a somewhat complicated issue. It seems that the GRA has rules about mundanes who get involved with the supernatural world, and those who brought the mundanes are responsible for them. The wizard questions if then the couple is his responsibility. Lucy says no, even though it was he who saved them. The ones who brought the couple into the supernatural world were the vampires, so the GRA took the two back to the bloodsuckers. Callum is outraged to discover that the guild took the people he saved and returned them to those who would harm them. The hacker knows that this rule is stupid, but the GRA is very strict when it comes to following procedures. The protagonist opens a portal right there and asks for the names and locations of the vampires, agents, and the entire department. Lucy comments that she understands the anger, but hopes he is not planning an attack against the GRA. But Callum remains angry and repeats that he wants to know everyone's name. To any random person walking by, this place seems just like another corporate building, but there is something more beneath all the luxury and protection. This is the GRA headquarters in Kansas, hidden in plain sight. Callum tries to force himself to think carefully and wonders what his next step will be. At the bookstore, the protagonist asks Lucy for the names and locations of the vampires, agents, and the entire department. The girl understands the reason for his anger, but hopes he won't attack the GRA. However, the wizard repeats that he needs the names, and is already on the other side of the portal near his motorcycle. The girl reminds him that she works for the GRA and that this is too risky even for her, even though she understands the anger and is on his side. Then she comments that attacking the guild in any way right now would be the same as throwing his life away. The young man questions how he can possibly let this go, since innocent people are being simply discarded. And he believes this is his fault, because if he had taken the couple somewhere else, this would never have happened. Callum chose to leave them alone there to protect his own interests, and now he needs to find a way out of this situation. Lucy says he needs to choose his battles, since not even an archmage could defeat the GRA overnight. And she questions how many people will not be saved if the protagonist loses his life. The hacker admires what he is trying to do, and believes that the GRA is a great disaster, but she asks the wizard not to abandon everything he has fought for just because of a bad day. The young man admits that she is right, but he still needs those names if he wants to prepare, because the more he knows, the better he can plan. Lucy agrees and says she will get the information, but asks him not to do anything foolish. Callum repeats the last sentence in his head, and thinks he needs to thank the girl for convincing him to get out of this mess. Until he improves his magical skills, he won't be able to attack a GRA office, at least not at this moment. But the protagonist swears that one day he will make them pay for their crimes. The next day, the specialist Jasper is talking on the phone and comments that the young man's question is very strange. Then he asks why he is interested in young wizards. He explains that he is curious and knows that children discover their magic very early, but wants to know if there is any case where this does not happen and why. The old man just says he doesn't know because he is not a doctor, and imagines that perhaps this could happen if there is no mana. Despite this, any child who grows up near wizards would already be able to achieve something just through the magic present in the air. Callum thinks that if someone grows up far from wizards, perhaps their magic will never manifest. Jasper had never seen anything like this, but he believes it is indeed possible. The protagonist thinks it makes sense, since the first time he used magic was during the attack on the Shahe Fitness Center. It is likely that was the first time he felt a surge of this, as his parents did not seem to be wizards. The young man wonders what his life would have been like if he had been born into a family of wizards. Then the specialist tries to understand the reason for these questions, and if perhaps the wizard has a hidden child they are unaware of. Callum says that if he did, he wouldn't tell, but he thanks the fake Harry for his help and says he will call if he needs anything. Now the protagonist is stuck in traffic and wants to know more about how Lucy's family was all wizards, except for her. The girl confirms this and doesn't seem very excited when she mentions that there was a lot of fun at the Harper residence. The young man imagines that must have been quite difficult. She explains that this is why the GRA assigned them more tedious tasks, because they didn't know what to do with a mundane and shoved her into the IT department. Our wizard comments that they are idiots. Lucy feels flattered and asks about his family, Callum says that Harry also wanted to know about his family, and he is starting to think that Chester sent them both to gather information. The hacker says she can't blame them for their curiosity, since if a nice and mysterious guy comes to town and starts acting like a hero, it's normal to want to know more. The protagonist feels all giddy imagining himself as someone nice and mysterious, and the girl says those words were indeed his and not Chester's. He thinks his personal life isn't that interesting, but maybe he will end up sharing a thing or two eventually. Lucy suggests swapping stories on their first date, which makes the wizard say that her charm is torture, and she even asks if it makes him anxious. Look at that. The young man replies that yes, in a good way, but he thinks he is still not ready to reveal who he is. The hacker takes a cute selfie while saying she is already getting chills from so much excitement, and then she says goodbye to him, hanging up the phone. The selfie arrives on Callum's phone, with a heart covering the girl's face. He smiles a little upon seeing her photo. Already at the bookstore, the protagonist is sitting with Gale, who comments that she is bored from studying so much. Her teacher tries to remind her of the reason for all the hard work, and she knows it's to skip the learning phase but questions why the books have to be so complex. The wizard decides it's time for a break, and the girl says he is the best of all. Our young man apologizes for disappearing the other day and explains that he had an emergency with a colleague. The student assures him that it's all right because she knows he spends a lot of time helping her, and hopes that doesn't interfere with his work. Callum promises that this is not the case, and that he always looks forward to their study sessions. At that moment, the girl takes his hands, and says she owes him one, and if he needs any favor, he can ask freely. Our wizard thinks about the favor and says that actually there is one thing. He has been thinking about more movement options, since the GRA's teleportation circles work well, but he was wanting something more portable. Gale tells him that her father has a personal league, and while she can't give it as a gift, she thinks he could take a look at it. The young man wonders what the heck a personal league is. Then he says he would love to check out that object, as the friend who lent him those books has some theories he would like to research. The girl asks if those theories are about teleportation and wonders if the professor's friend is a space wizard. Callum is confused and wants to know the reason for that question. She explains that a space wizard would have problems if they shared information without their master knowing, since the GRA keeps that type of magic under control. The protagonist seems nervous when he questions what would happen if the guild found out. Gale has only heard some gossip, but it seems that something happens after they are captured by Archmage Duval. These space wizards are never seen alive again. The student promises her teacher that she will talk to her father about the personal league, and he says goodbye until next week. Being able to move faster really does seem pretty cool. Gale thinks she can't blame the protagonist for wanting something more portable. After all, those GRA teleportation circles are kind of boring. She just hopes the wizard doesn't get into any trouble with the guild. The girl imagines that he knows what he is doing, since he is a teacher. Her body is enveloped by purple energy as the teleportation is activated, and then she appears in another location. The grand hall is filled with teleportation circles. A woman asks Miss Hargrave if she is going home, to which the girl replies yes. The staff member says she will accompany her to the private network. With that, the two walk side by side through the area. Gale notices that the other circles have just been used and questions if everything is alright, as she has never seen the private network so full. The young woman doesn't know much, but it seems that something has been scaring the GRA in recent days, so the trips have been quite frequent around there. With a curious expression, the girl says that this seems quite interesting. She arrives in another place through the private circle. Her butler greets her and asks how her study session went. Gale tells Butler Jameson that it was quite boring, then explains that she likes her study partner but thinks that many topics are unnecessary. The man says that she is the future of the Hargrave family, and it is normal for expectations to be high for someone so important. The girl says he is right, and she just wants it to be over soon. Sometime later, the heiress is in the bathtub while two maids take care of her bath. She stares at her various clothes in her large wardrobe, and leaves the room all dressed up in a yellow dress. Gale sees her father at the dining table and comments that she is happy to know he managed to take a break amid so many responsibilities. Mr. Hargrave tells her that someone is causing trouble with the vampire hunter issue, so they left that mess in the hands of the archmages. Thinking of a terrible vampire hunter, the girl says that sounds scary. Her father warns that her grandfather, Archmage Hargrave, will stop by for dinner later, and so the girl needs to prepare, and she says she will do that. But then she asks if she can ask a favor while he is there, to which the man responds wanting to know what kind of favor it is. Gale questions if she can take her personal league to her study session next week. The magnate explains that a personal league is not a cheap object, and that it is made personally by Archmage Duval. His daughter promises that she won't activate it, and that she only needs it because she believes its enchantment could be useful for research. The doting father decides he will allow it just because his little girl is asking. She hugs her father while smiling and thanking him. At that moment, the staff announces that dinner is ready. Mr. Hargrave tells them to eat quickly before the grandfather arrives and ruins the mood, which makes the girl catch his attention with a giggle. A week later, Gale tells Callum that she promised her father she would borrow the personal league for just a few hours, and hopes that's alright. The protagonist comments that everything is great, and that he is already grateful just to be able to look at such an object up close. His student says it is coded to respond to pulse identification, so they won't be able to activate it. Our mage stares at the ring while thinking about how everything is connected to those damn tattoos. The boy says it is basically a customized ring and an enchanted plate. It seems simple if not analyzed closely, but he imagines that the ring is quite complex inside. Gale asks how he guessed something like that. Callum explains that it's just a hunch, and that if the Archmage produces it personally, it must require a lot of skill, but thinks that's just what a normal mage would say. He can't tell the girl, but his spatial sense allows him to see the hidden parts of that enchantment. The protagonist doesn't understand the theory behind all of this. However, he thinks he is capable of producing one of those, and he is lost in his thoughts when the student calls his attention. The mage is even startled to hear his false name, and he apologizes for daydreaming, then thanks the girl for bringing this fascinating object, and Gale hopes it will be useful for her research. Now in a kind of bar, the attendant tells the GRA agents that he cannot say he hasn't seen anything out of the ordinary, but they are in a shapeshifter bar in a biker town, so someone needs to be very strange to stand out there. Ray understands and thanks for the attention. Outside, Felicia comments on how ridiculous it is that they followed yet another useless lead. She seems frustrated for not having gotten anything from the shapeshifters, the fae, and even the vampires. So try to understand how it is possible for a murderer to disappear from the entire magical world. Your partner believes it is a very talented person. The mermaid says that the traces disappear more with each passing day, and that they might not even be able to catch him if they continue at this pace. Ray lights his cigarette, and comments that this is just one way to look at the situation. She questions what he means by that, and the blonde explains that if the culprit just rested for the rest of his life, it would indeed be difficult to find him. But according to his experience, criminals rarely stay still for so long. It may not happen tomorrow or the day after, but one day he will strike again. And the more he attacks, the more likely he is to make a mistake. Felicia says that if the theory that the first attack was a rescue is indeed correct, then they know this murderer has a weak point. Her partner says that he is not a cold person and forms bonds like anyone else, and he even bets that he must have some allies. All they need to capture him is for at least one of those allies to speak up, and then the whole case will be exposed. Callum thinks he had to make some attempts with laser cutting, but he believes he finally succeeded. If everything really worked out, then the ring in his hands is a personal alloy with perfect functioning. The only thing he needs to do now is fill the object with his spatial vision. As soon as he fully charges the enchantment, it should activate automatically, taking the protagonist to the plate that is in the bathroom. The round object lights up and the wizard thinks he is almost there. His power flows through his hands and rises into the air. Then the magical ring shines with all that spatial energy, and the young man simply disappears from the room in the blink of an eye. The energy forms a kind of powerful current, and Callum appears in the bathroom, crashing into his bathtub. He feels a bit of pain and thinks he needs to improve his landing skills, but his experiment was a great success. The whole project took only a few days to complete, and the protagonist is starting to suspect that spatial magic is not as complicated as the GRA says. Archmage Duval just prefers to keep all this potential locked beneath her authority. If the other wizards do not know about this, she can pretend to be much more important to the guild, which means that the young man's situation is even more complicated. Fugitives are hunted by the guild, and any kind of rebellious wizard is already a problem. Imagine then a rebellious wizard who is capable of exposing Archmage Duval as a great fraud. Callum thinks about what would happen if he had to face the woman, and he believes she could be the greatest threat to the GRA at this moment. Now in the bookstore, Gale celebrates having succeeded, and the protagonist asks to see her result. The girl concentrates and hopes this works. Her healing energy activates the symbols on the plate, while the wizard asks her to keep it stable. She is enveloped by her power and comments that this is not the best shield in the world, but it should be enough to pass the test. Our young man thinks it turned out very well, actually. The student raises her plate, and is happy to have finally completed the last item on her list. Callum seems a bit down as he says this must be the end of their study sessions. Gale says she can come back next week to tell how the test went, and if they ask for anything else, she might still need his help. The protagonist says he would be happy to help, but his sleeve lifts to reveal a bruise on his arm. The girl notices the injury and asks if he is okay, which surprises him a bit. Our wizard imagines it must have happened during the personal alloy accident, and he does not understand how he did not notice it before. His student asks to take a look since it should be easy to heal such an injury, but the young man says he does not need to do that, and that he will be fine. But Gale insists, commenting that after everything he has done for her, this is just the least she can do. Her hand releases the healing power that reaches the bruise. The girl feels a bit shy upon realizing that her teacher's arm is much stronger than she imagined. She notices that the protagonist does not look like just any nerdy teacher. Then Callum asks if everything is okay. Gale replies that yes, and informs him that the injury should disappear after a few minutes. The teacher praises her talent, and says he already feels better. At this moment, the girl says she needs to go home because she wants to schedule her tests before she forgets everything she studied. But the boy suddenly holds her hand and asks her to wait a little longer. He tells Gale not to let others bring her down, and swears he believes in her. The girl smiles and thanks her teacher, looking determined. The next day, the student is wearing workout clothes and holding a sign in her hands. A man takes his clipboard and says they will start evaluating the skill list, jumping to the light magic since her school has already confirmed she has healing powers. Gale holds her sign with one hand and activates the light ability with the other. Then the girl floats in the air to prove she can perform the movement magic. Now her power surrounds her as she shows she can activate a shield. The guy evaluating the test informs her that everything was perfect, and now they will move on to an offensive attack. The girl takes a deep breath as she concentrates. She remembers what she practiced when she followed her teacher Brown's advice, and she shines with healing energy, ready to launch her attack. Gale directs her power toward the dummy that will be her target. Cracks begin to form in the material, and then the dummy explodes with impressive force. The girl is happy to see that her new ability worked, but the man looks at her suspiciously as he asks what the hell that was. She explains that it was a healing attack, designed to cause a clotting reaction. The guy jots something down on his clipboard and says that this is interesting. Gale asks if she did something wrong. She knows it's not something common like a fireball, but she thought it would count for the test too. At that moment, the bald man comments that he needs to check something and asks the girl to wait right there. 4 hours pass, and the girl continues waiting, then wonders how long she will have to wait since she is getting nervous. Suddenly, a door opens with a noise. The familiar agents from GRA appear, and Ray says he hopes Miss Hargrave hasn't waited too long. Gale tries to understand what is happening and asks if she failed her test. The blonde man says he doesn't handle that kind of issue and is more interested in the healing attack she used during the evaluation. He asks if the girl came up with that on her own, and she replies that at first, she did not. The girl continues saying that her study partner told her that this would be a simple way to destabilize a body and gave tips on what to research. Ray has a somewhat sinister expression as he questions whether this study partner has a name. The student says his name is Professor Brown, and then wants to know if they are in trouble in any way. That's when the agent puts his hand on his chin, and with an ironic smile says that Miss Hargrave might indeed be in trouble. She looks nervous upon hearing that she must tell everything she knows about this Professor Brown. The hacker in her room full of monitors asks the protagonist how he is. He asks Lucy if she has any updates on GRA. The girl comments that they are still irritated because they can't find the ghost assassin, which is quite amusing to watch. Many vampires are surrounding the area, but since nothing has happened, it seems that things are starting to calm down. Callum sees no problem with that, as he never wanted that much attention anyway. He says he has a quick question while they have time, and he wants to know what the hacker can tell him about the Hargrave family. Lucy looks desperate as she asks if the guy is involved with them. The protagonist tells her that he met a Hargrave named Gale and offered a little help, but he is just curious about who she really is. The girl starts researching and reads that Gale Hargrave is a 22-year-old mage. She suddenly stops reading, and her hand freezes over the keyboard. The hacker says that this doesn't sound good at all. Callum asks what she is talking about. Lucy explains that the Hargraves are from a very old family that invented at least half of the offensive spells used today. They can be considered one of the most dangerous wizard families in the entire world. Archmage Hargrave defined the concept of martial magic, and there is almost no one who can defeat him. Despite this, Gale is a healer, which means there must have been some kind of crossbreeding between lineages. The protagonist questions whether it was an accident. Suddenly, some Hargrave had an affair with a healer, and that's how the girl was born. Lucy finds this difficult since high houses are obsessed with this kind of thing, and a ring would make more sense, which would make the family even stronger. It is possible that they were trying to create a new talent, which means that Gale is the Hargrave's most valuable asset at the moment. They wouldn't be happy if someone interfered with those plans, so it's better for Callum to stay away since his grandfather is an archmage. The hacker says that if he touches his granddaughter, there may be nothing in this world that can protect him, and the young man is shocked to learn that the girl's grandfather is an archmage. The protagonist thanks her for the warning, and says he doesn't know what he would do without Lucy, and she asks him to be careful out there. This is more dangerous than our mage thought, and now he imagines it might be better not to show up for his last meeting with the heiress. But disappearing out of nowhere might raise more suspicions. The young man doesn't want Gale to use his family's resources to track him down, so he decides to show up just to say goodbye and then move on. Meanwhile, at the bookstore where the study sessions take place, men in black communicate, saying that Team A is ready. Team B also confirms their position, and Team C is made up of the good old GRA agents. Felicia thinks this is an exaggeration since Archmage Hargrave could take down the entire city by himself, so they don't need so much to catch a supposed rebel. Ray explains that the Archmage insisted on being there when he learned that the guy was manipulating his granddaughter, and he asks what the chances are of there being 2 rebel mages. The blonde knows he wouldn't be able to convince the Hargraves to do otherwise. Meanwhile, the Archmage contorts his face in anger. The mermaid wants to know if her partner wants to use the binoculars, but he says he can sense better if he uses his wind magic. A camera shows an image of Callum, and someone says that a possible target has been identified. The voice warns that he is walking north on Kent Avenue near 4th Street, and is heading towards something. But then they lose contact as the target simply disappears. An agent says that Team A has found him, and that they can see him. Ray realizes that the mage teleported and asks if the documents didn't say he had gravity magic. The blonde shouts for them to shoot immediately, and not to let the target have time to teleport. Then Tima receives the news that they have permission to act, and the men begin to move. One of them holds a large bazooka and prepares to fire. The protagonist realizes he is being attacked and wonders what the hell is going on. As a chain comes towards him, the young man tries to understand if this is the GRE's doing. He tries to activate his power in time, as he needs to move quickly. But the chain binds his hand before he can do anything. Callum realizes that his magic is not working. The mage feels as if his energy is fading. At that moment, a type of yellow, glowing rope comes flying through the air, and it wraps around the young man's body. One of the men in black announces that they have captured him. Ray and Felicia arrive at the scene with wind magic, and the blonde congratulates everyone on a job well done, but says that the two will take over the situation now. That's when several lightning bolts appear out of nowhere. The random agents seem to be afraid of what is to come. Then the Great Hargrave appears and asks to be given the rebel, as he wants to deal with the man who had the audacity to mess with his granddaughter. But Ray tries to convince the Archmage to let them complete their investigation. The suspect is detained and there is no longer any risk of escape. When they finish everything they need to do, they can see if they can leave the young man with the old man. But for now, the agent asks to be allowed to do his job. Around them, the other men are a bit worried. The Archmage decides to surrender for now, but insists that he be informed immediately about everything they do. Ray tells the others to search the suspect's pockets for anything that might link him to the attacks on the vampire nests. One guy announces that he found something. Then the blonde mage asks what was found. It seems they found another metal circle. With that, the GRA agent speaks to the others around him. He thinks they have finally found the killer. Callum was lying on a cold table and slowly begins to wake up. He wonders where he was. He couldn't remember what had happened and why he was imprisoned. The last thing he knew was that he was going to meet Gale. When he was surrounded by men in suits, he should have teleported the moment he detected a mage. But at the time, he deduced it could be Gale or one of the store owners. How could he have been so foolish? He questions angrily. The interrogation door opens, and the GRA agents enter. It seemed they had gathered information about him. They even knew his name now. Ray congratulates him. The kid knew how to hide very well. Half the agency was looking for a new space mage and the other half for a killer. They had never thought that the two people could be one. He really was good with magic, he had to admit. But now it was time for the most important part. His partner was going to ask the boy some questions. Felicia goes straight to the point, and using her power, asks if Callum was an accomplice in the destruction of the vampire nest in Winnet. However, the young man responds in a way they were not expecting, which surprises the mage. But Ray remains unfazed and continues saying that they had turned him in, and in fact, they were curious about why the young man had done that. He was just an ordinary person from West Virginia. He had no reason to violate the GR rules. But Callum responds to the blonde's question with another, asking if they knew that those vampires were taking people's lives. Felicia shakes her head and says that information was irrelevant. But it was relevant to Callum. What he wanted to know most was why GR was turning a blind eye to that situation. But the two ignore him, and Ray asks his partner to ask something else. They were also interested in who the young man was working for. And Callum replies that he was working for no one. He had always worked alone. After all, he did not get along with other authority figures. That was interesting. Perhaps Ray and the boy would get along under different circumstances. But now the boy was a rebel, and it was the blonde's job to put an end to any kind of rebellion against GR. Callum looks at him seriously. Things were really getting complicated for him. His sentence was quite long, but he wanted to know what evidence and protests they had used to arrest him. Then Ray says that his warrant had been issued jointly by GR authorities. It seemed the young man had managed to irritate many important people. For now, they wanted to know about the attack on the vampire base. But the BSE people had some more specific questions to address with him. Where he had learned the techniques he had informed Gale Hargrave about, and why he had taught her, they questioned. But he had only taught her basic things. It didn't make sense. Before he could finish, a stone was pushed in his direction, and they asked about the offensive healing technique. To Callum, that question didn't make much sense. After all, it was an obvious explanation. If healing magic could modify the body in one way, it could also do so in another. It was basic biochemistry. Now things were becoming obvious. Callum was distorting the rules of magic and mixing them with mundane ideas, an action that goes against GR rules. He had poisoned Gale's future with this so-called logical reasoning of his. But the boy didn't know that it was wrong and would bring so many problems to her. If it weren't for her grandfather's influence, Gale would probably also be considered a rebel mage. The biggest problem would be dealing with the BSC. After all, mixing the two ways of thinking, mage and human, was no state secret. Any doctor would notice. The two begin to argue over that issue. They clearly had different thoughts. Because of this, Callum's handcuffs react and release an electric shock on him. Ray says it would be better for the young man to calm down. Those sensors were quite sensitive. And once again, they start with the questions, asking if he wanted to recruit Gale for his organization. Callum replies that no, he had just seen a person in trouble and tried to help. But if he really wanted to help her, he had to be more compliant with the investigation. He couldn't believe the two were using an innocent woman as leverage in that way. BSE really took that kind of situation very seriously. It was not just any case. But Callum didn't understand. Any threat, and the secret police of that dictatorship would come running. But there was one issue. After that conversation, either of them would be able to see him again. Ray looks at him confused. He didn't understand where the other was trying to go. However, Callum continues speaking and says he was only talking to those two agents to buy time. The agent says it was pointless. It was not possible to use magic in that room, and they had also sealed all his enchantments. But the young man didn't need to create a portal. He had taken precautions in case a situation like that happened. A cursed ring with return magic was very obvious and easy to obtain, so he hid it in a place that none of the agents would think to search, and only he would have access. At that moment, the GRA agents fell into despair and headed in his direction to try to stop him. But it was already too late. The magic had already been activated. Ray unleashed his power, but before reaching Callum, he disappeared. Where could he have fled to, they wondered. The agent then activated Command Force so that all available GRA agents would gather for the hunt to find the fugitive Callum Wells. The two agents were discussing the return magic that the young man had activated and how rare it was for someone to use such a method. There was a possibility that suddenly another person had given him that idea, but Ray had never heard of anything like that. The documents stated that only one person was capable of that until then. They could use the blood trail. This magic could track the target up to 10 miles and would last all night. But even using it, he probably should have already escaped. It seemed they had returned to square one. Someone complained about not being informed that the space mage was in the custody of the GR. She was the master mage. They should have notified her. When she found out who was working behind her back, they would definitely make him pay. Her servant said that for now, they did not have that information, but there were more important matters to discuss. Whatever group Callum Wells belonged to, they were associated with unrestricted magic. That was indeed a big problem, especially since he had corrupted a young healing mage. Because of this, it was not surprising to know how alert the agents were. Healing magic was the only magic that, when used offensively, could pierce through protection and resistance magic. If she researched deeper into this forbidden magic, she would be able to obliterate a room full of mages in the blink of an eye. They had to think of someone who could help them. Normally, space mages were not dangerous, but they could be wrong. But the master did not accept that. Space mages could not be dangerous. Perhaps they had some tricks up their sleeves, but nothing that posed a threat. That type of magic was the safest of all. It should not be feared. John agreed with the master and said he would do everything in his power to handle the situation. The master was very clear. She wanted them to find that young man to know who had taught him and what his bloodline was. Every 3 to 4 decades, a space mage emerged, and she needed all of them. So it was better that John did his best. Trembling for his life, he agreed and accepted the orders. In the middle of a forest, a man walks. Callum is grateful for having previously hidden supplies in that place. Clothes, weapons, money, and even some magic books. He had everything necessary to start over. But how had he messed up so badly without realizing it, he wondered. Now the GR knew everything about him. His personal identity was completely compromised. They thought he was part of some secret organization. Perhaps that would buy him some time so they wouldn't find him so easily. Callum opened a new portal, thinking that for now, he would have to wait for the dust to settle and avoid using his powers. Lucy answered his call. She thought she would never hear Callum's voice again. It seemed he had really gone there and caused the chaos he so desired. The young man asked if the situation was very bad, and she replied that despite him having initiated a deadly hunt, things were actually quite calm. No one was admitting or accusing anyone. He commented that he might have shown off a bit at the end, and she replied that now he was considered a terrorist, so he had indeed crossed some lines. But now Lucy was interested in the details of what was happening with him. For now, Callum just wanted to make sure she was okay. Next time he would tell her everything properly. He didn't want her to get involved. But she told him not to worry. They could only come after them if they still had the research material, but she had already seen what she needed. Taking advantage of the fact that they were talking about the research, he wanted to know if she had any magical supplies to recommend, preferably something that lasts a long time. Lucy thought for a moment. Good quality magical supplies like Callum wanted were hard to come by, especially when it was a person and not a guild asking. They teased each other a bit, and soon returned to the important subject, even knowing where the supplies came from. It would be illegal just to show up in one of the caves and take them, but since he was already a criminal, perhaps it wouldn't be such a problem after all. He had expected that answer. He would have to find a way in the end. But before disconnecting, Lucy needed to inform him that Mistress Duval was really angry. As the governess of the Space Wizards, Duval basically owned all the others that had ever existed. So no matter what he did, it was better for Callum not to be caught by her. He needed to be careful. Later that night, Callum was reading the materials that Lucy had sent him. It seemed he was getting closer to the theory of the FAE, so that information would be useful. He had gained fighting experience and knowledge of every species he had come into contact with before. But until then, the closest he had come to the FAE was that GR agent. It seemed that her magic came solely from the vis. The FA were capable of doing unimaginable things using the basics of magic. But unfortunately, that didn't make them the strongest. Well, it was better for him to read more carefully from then on. Not being prepared was the worst thing he could do. Suddenly, he felt that someone had entered his magical field. There were 3 different types of souls, but they were not human souls. They might be the FA. The people of the trees, pixies, but the third, what could they be? They seemed to have some kind of necklace around their necks. Only then did he manage to see what it was. Human ears were attached to the cord of those beings. 2 people were running through the forest. They seemed to be almost at the exit, but the woman was reaching her limit. Even so, the guy insisted. They were surely right behind them, and even having run all night, they couldn't stop. Because if they stopped, they would surely end up like the others. A few years earlier, a child was asking his father to go play on the slide. That child was Callum at 7 years old. Several other children were running around the playground while he went to the slide. As soon as he climbed up, he heard a boy teasing another. They were on the jungle gym, and the child at the top didn't want the others to climb up. For that, they would have to ask for his permission first. And when the boy climbing said that the playground wasn't just his, the bully pushed him off the jungle gym and mocked him. Well, that had nothing to do with Callum, so he continued on the slide, having fun with the descent. But as soon as he got off, he bumped into his father, who asked what he was doing. He wanted to know why his son hadn't gone to help the other boy who had been pushed. It was wrong to see someone being bullied and do nothing about it. He hadn't raised him to be that way. But then Callum asked why he had to get involved. He couldn't understand. The one who had pushed the boy was the other one still on the jungle gym. Why was his father mad at him? He questioned. Then the older man said that because his son was bigger and stronger than the other, he should protect him. But still, the child remained a bit confused. His father approached and said that it was his job to protect those in need. The bad guys win when good people see everything and do nothing. And he wanted Callum to always remember that. What should he do now? He wondered. If the FAU were hunting humans, he had to stop them. But if he got involved, there was a possibility of ending up on the guard's radar. After all, the incident with the vampires had brought those investigators to him first. He needed to get out of there quickly. He would do what he should have done from the beginning, open a portal and flee. But then a horn was heard. The birds began to fly in flocks due to the sound. The FA troop was nearby. They had until dawn to finish the hunt. One of them asked the tree if they had managed to locate the humans. But the creature replied that they had not. It didn't matter. They shouldn't have run that far. How they loved that feeling of the hunt. At that moment, Callum felt that they had started to move. What should he do? He was in doubt. His father's words passed through his mind. Whom was he trying to fool? He had been raised to save and care for the weaker. Well, it was time for him to try to prevent the FA from finding the humans while also not getting caught by the GR. First, he had to have an idea of where everyone was. His magic could only map about 2 kilometers. If he stayed close to the edge of his mapping, he might be able to follow them without being detected. If he was cautious, no one would notice his presence. The GR agents had managed to capture him before because they had hidden the traces of their magic. He didn't know if the FAU were capable of doing the same, but he knew how many there were in total. Because of that, he could tell if any of them disappeared suddenly. If that happened, he would have to flee and think of a new strategy. At the moment, he had 24 bullets. But his mission was not to kill the FAE but to reach the humans before the hunters and ensure their safety. The only question was how he would hide the 2 humans afterward. Wait a second, they were close to the mountains. There were several underground caves in the area. If he could hide them there for a while. The issue was, they couldn't stay there for too long. Would they last until the end of the hunt? The 2 humans continued running through the forest when the woman tripped and fell to the ground. She couldn't continue. Her whole body was trembling. Finally, the man gives in and says they can try to hide. Suddenly, a shadow appears from the bushes. They panic and ask the monster to back off. But soon Callum's face can be seen. He asks the humans to stay calm, as he had come to help them. Despite their fear, they listened to him. To survive, they would have to follow everything the young man said. Hannah was still a bit confused, but the young mage said there was no time to explain and needed them to turn left at the next fork in the valley. In that direction, as soon as they turned, they would see a pine tree. They needed to go quickly, as fast as possible. The man asks if there is any way he can show them the way, and Callum replies that he couldn't accompany them but would be watching their backs. First, he needed to ensure they would be safe. Then he needed to make the humans create a trail to draw the FA away from that direction for the moment. If they went with him, his magic could be detected by them. He gives the coordinates, and the man says he would do as instructed. After that, they separate. Gradually, the 2 humans walk through the forest in the direction the young man had indicated and finally find the pine tree he mentioned. They hoped desperately that this was the tree, as they were already at their limit. But who was that man? Could they really trust him? They wondered. Yet they had no other option but this one. But before finishing the sentence, a portal opens in the ground beneath them, and they fall into the underground. Callum apologizes. He had forgotten to warn them about the possibility of falling. Hannah asks who he really was and how he managed to do that. The mage says they were a few miles from where they were before, and the important thing was that they were safe now. The 2 thank him for that. Callum then asks what was happening and how they got into this whole mess. But they replied that they didn't know. The monsters said they were participating in a hunt and had to survive until dawn. It seemed then that it was all just a game. They were hunting people just for fun. Callum couldn't let that go unpunished. He then opens another portal. He had heard enough. He would stop them, for better or for worse. The day was dawning, and they still hadn't found the humans, but they still had a few hours thanks to the mountains. It was precisely because of that they hunted in that region. But while they spoke, they didn't notice the strange movement behind them. They continued boasting about tricking humans and how much fun it was. Even so, they couldn't waste any more time. They needed to move quickly. And it was at that moment that they finally missed the pixies. With their distraction, they didn't notice a portal opening right beneath their feet. At the last second, they managed to escape the open hole, but one of the tree monsters fell. It completely disappeared into the darkness. Everyone wondered what was happening. They had never gone through anything like this before and needed to report to the monarchs soon. One of the trees went to inform the superiors, but another portal opened, and a boulder fell on it. The redhead became irritated, but soon a mini portal opened in front of her, and a shot is heard throughout the forest. The remaining mage gathers his power, and then manages to spot the mage responsible for that power. Roots begin to form, and a bow with an arrow appears. The arrow flies toward Callum. When he saw he had been noticed, he opened a portal to try to escape. The arrow hits the spot where he was, exploding everything around. That had come very close. Dealing with the pixies had been easy because the portals were smaller, so no one noticed. But making a portal large enough to catch the others might have been a bit ambitious. He had only managed to catch one of the 3 tree monsters. They were surprisingly fast, and Callum needed to be careful not to let them get too close. To make matters worse, one of the FAE was able to detect his presence. Before he could finish his thought, he senses a presence approaching and turns to see what was coming in his direction. He dodges the attack and quickly prepares his weapon. A few shots head towards the target but end up hitting a random tree. The young man is momentarily lost, trying to identify where his enemy had gone. But before he realizes it, an attack comes from behind and hits him squarely. He is thrown towards a rock, clearly battered, and wonders how they managed to get behind him without him noticing. They probably must have used some kind of magic, but in this game, he also had his advantages. Callum concentrates and begins to scan the area around him. Seconds later, he can feel the soul of the being nearby. Then he starts to move in a way that lures the enemy towards him. And just as expected, the monster appears from within one of the trees. It seems he could teleport from tree to tree. The mage shoots in its direction, but the creature is faster, and soon the bark of the trunk closes. The young man was really in trouble now. After all, there was only one way to deal with such an enemy. He had to find a way to create an attack in the monster's blind spot, just as he had done before. He refocuses and pays attention to the enemy's movements, and when it decides to leave the tree, Callum has the opening he has been waiting for. The young man dodges the attack, opens a portal behind the monster, and shoots, causing the bullet to pass through another portal that appeared in front of the enemy. He didn't like doing that kind of thing, but he couldn't let human hunters like them get away. That was a crime he could not forgive. A portal opens to the underground, and the remaining fairy falls. At that moment, she starts to feel confused, not understanding where she was. Moreover, the air down there was thin. She had fallen into some kind of cave through that cursed portal. As she walks a bit further, her foot touches something. And it was at that moment that she knew she was in trouble, as she came face to face with the pixies that had disappeared earlier. An hour later, and the sun was already high in the sky. The humans had managed to escape and wanted to repay Callum in some way. But the young man responds that it wasn't necessary. The safest thing was for them to forget what had happened in the forest, and especially his involvement in what had occurred. He knew that this situation had likely been traumatizing for both of them, and wished he could help them more, but he needed to return to his hideout soon. He wishes the couple good luck, and then the 3 part ways. Already on his motorcycle, Callum calls Chester. Having gotten involved with that group of fairies, he needed to know how exposed he was now. The man then asks him to describe what kind of fairies he had dealt with. The young man says there were some pixies, a tree monster, and 2 elves, and all of them were hunting humans in the mountains. Chester ponders for a moment, and his silence makes Callum a little anxious. The man warns the young man that he needed to leave that place quickly, as they were noble-type fairies, and soon the monarch would learn about their deaths. Without thinking twice, he continues to accelerate his motorcycle. He would add those fairies to his list of people hunting him. Chester takes the moment to give Callum an idea and invites the boy to work with him, thus ensuring he would be protected for a while. He thanks him but declines the offer. After having faced the GRA, he was even more eager for his freedom. He wouldn't mind doing some freelance work occasionally, but he never wanted to work for any boss again. Even so, he would need a safe place to stay, a place where supernatural power wouldn't be able to find him. But the young man already had an idea of where to go, and hangs up the call. Meanwhile, in Lucy's room, you might wonder what was going through that boy's mind. The girl then replies that the young man must be feeling quite proud after escaping from the GR. Indeed, Callum had managed to do something extraordinary, and that raised even more questions in Chester's mind about the boy's true identity. He then asks if Lucy had found any more information about the boy's past, but it seemed that until a few months ago, he really was just a human. But humans didn't become mages out of nowhere. He surely must have some noble in his family tree. Who, after all, were that boy's parents? That was the question that lingered in the air. Callum finally arrived at the destination he wanted, hoping he wasn't making a mistake. Walking towards the international airport, he admits that Chester was right. He needed to find a place where he could have good nights of rest without necessarily worrying about the supernatural world. If even a small town like Winnet was on the radar of those agents, he didn't have many options. Fortunately, he had found a great hiding spot on the first day he became a wizard, in the old lady's house. He then remembers the conversation he was having in the car about the guild and the borders with the portal of the 6 worlds. At that time, he didn't quite understand the word world in the plural, but in reality, among the wizards there were some planets that existed between Earth and the multiverse. These planets are responsible for supplying mana to Earth, so the GR are responsible for defending them. Each world corresponds to a different type of supernatural species, from vampires to fairies, dragons, and mermaids. Callum mentally thanks Agent Sin for that information. It had been useful after all. According to what he had said, the entrances to the portals were heavily guarded by elite wizards. Moreover, to enter the portal, you had to be accompanied by another stronger wizard. In other words, if he could get past security, he could stay safe for a while. The portal he was currently looking for was on another continent, and because of that, it had a completely different type of security to deal with. The airport was very well guarded, and he wouldn't be able to teleport easily into some random plane. However, buying a ticket was also not an option. They could track him through that. So what could he do to catch a flight in a non-traditional way without getting caught? The airport was very busy, and even using magic to avoid detection, he accidentally bumped into a woman who was left confused about what had happened. That was close. He almost got discovered. The type of magic he had learned from Gale allowed him to disappear from the eyes of normal people, but he still needed to be careful with every step. He stops to assess the situation a bit, but with the number of people present, Callum found himself on a nearly impossible mission. Suddenly, a thief comes running towards him with the police right behind. He wasn't expecting a robbery in that place out of nowhere. The young man tries not to get involved, as that would be better for him. But then the elderly lady appears asking for help regarding her purse, and once again, Callum finds himself getting involved in a situation that could compromise him. The little thief runs towards the emergency exit door, but suddenly he trips and falls hard to the ground. Obviously, the young man, taking advantage of the spell, made him trip on purpose. The thief is then caught by the police. At that moment, the boy ends up seeing the officer's ID on his belt, and an idea pops into his head. While the officer took the culprit away, the young man used the ID to enter the security area. Elsewhere, in the middle of the forest, the king of the tree people observed what had happened the night before. Surely a fight had occurred in the area. There were several things out of place, broken trees and branches, and in addition, there were footprints of a human. Clearly, a wizard had no respect for nature, and because of that, the earth would surely remember who that offender was. The king then activates his vision power, and gradually, his memories are filled with scenes from the previous night. The woman accompanying him asks what he is seeing, but in the end, something curious was revealed. A wizard he didn't know. This was unprecedented. Even though it was something that would normally be resolved by the GAR, the king couldn't let what had happened to his family go unpunished. That said, he concentrated a bit more of his power in his hands and spread it throughout the forest. Joining with the wind, his magic would be able to guide them to the culprit. Thus, they ended up at the airport. The presence of the one they were looking for seemed to end inside that building in the distance. Suddenly, a human approaches them, warning that they couldn't stay in the middle of the runway. The woman asked for permission to deal with the human, while the guard continued saying that that area was restricted and that they couldn't cross the limits. King Gisarel enters his monarch mode. After all, no one could command the king. But the human didn't care if he was king of something or somewhere. To him, the two had to leave immediately. At that moment, Gisarel becomes furious and grabs the officer by the head. Out of pure anger at the human's arrogance, he brutally takes his life. Then, he orders the woman beside him to call someone to clean up that mess, while he himself would go in search of the unknown wizard. Callum waits for the plane to empty before moving again. He had arrived at his destination. Upon entering the bathroom, he undoes the magic he was using. That fight he had faced during the night had truly left him in a rather unpleasant state. If only Gale were with him, he could heal a bit with her magic. They were asking how the girl was doing. After all, he had put her in a big mess. Teaching her about forbidden magic was something he was preoccupied with. The only real crime the girl had committed was crossing his path. Perhaps one day he could repay her in some way. Without expecting to be caught off guard, a flight attendant opens the bathroom door and comes face to face with him. She is startled to see someone inside the plane. She had hoped there would be no one there. Callum then apologizes and says he was just about to leave. Having said that, he bids farewell to the flight attendant as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was just a little longer until he could reach the country with the portals. He wanted to be out of the Gar's clutches soon and hoped that somehow they had forgotten about his existence. A few hours later, rain was pouring heavily as a woman waited by the sea. King Gisarel approached her, and she said she was waiting for his majesty. They exchanged brief greetings. It seemed that even the king of the forest people was not foolish enough to face the seas in those conditions. The woman was curious about his presence. After all, it wasn't every day that the king was there. From what the man had said, a human had attacked them, and he had gone to ask the GR investigators for help in finding him. They should be prepared to be responsible for that hunt. Inside the security tower, Ray approached Gisarel, apologizing for the delay. It seemed that something renegade was driving everyone crazy. The noble then reported what he had seen in the forest to the agent, speaking about the tears in space-time. Ray couldn't have been happier to hear that, and the king noticed the change in the agent's face. He then explained that considering the facts he had been told, he already had an idea of who the wizard he was looking for might be. Ray then took out a photo and showed it to Gisarel. The agent explained who that rebel was and asked where they had seen him. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, Callum managed to find the portal he was looking for. He knew that the destination was the land of dragons, and that was one of the most dangerous worlds among the planets. To add to that, he didn't have much information about the magic that the dragons used, and they were the strongest species among the supernatural beings. Considering all those factors, he found it surprising how lax security was around there. There was only one wizard guarding that entrance. The only thing he had to do was get past him, and he would be free for a while. And it seemed that the traps set in that area were not for tracking. Probably the GR was only activated when a dragon passed through the portal. If he could keep his visibility to a minimum, he would be able to pass through the alarms without triggering any. He had to be cautious and start with something small. Callum threw a stone, causing the guard to pay attention to the noise and not to his table. This way, he managed to teleport the security guard's radio to another place. The man began to search, and upon spotting his radio a little further away, he went to it. As soon as he turned his back to the portal, Callum began to move. Hoping he hadn't made a mistake, he entered the dragon portal, thus passing into their world. A bright light blinded him for a moment, and the wind in that place was very strong. The wizard found himself in the middle of a valley of beautiful stones. The environment was completely different from Earth, and mana flowed through the air. At first, it was difficult, but gradually he would get used to that sensation. And about that portal, upon crossing it, he realized how complex its formation was. It didn't come close to the magic he was capable of producing. Having succeeded in his objective, he took the moment to make some notes about what he had learned and what he was seeing. But soon he realized he was not alone, and before he could defend himself, chains of fire appeared around him. The pain he felt now was very intense. Meanwhile, pedestals formed right in front of him, completely surrounded by fire. A red dragon appears, stating that the young man had violated the laws of that world by entering the land of dragons. Because of that, he should perish there and then. However, before the attack could reach the human, by some miracle, the dragon recognizes him and calls him by name. For a second, the image of a man appears in his mind, and Callum recognizes him. That was Shahe. A cell phone vibrates in the agent's pocket. It seemed he had received a text message. Someone was willing to help in his hunt for Callum and had prepared a list of agents for him to review. There were indeed many people interested in capturing that young man. After all, no one expected that just one rebellious wizard could cause such a commotion. He had achieved the impossible, not only escaping the guild but also making the entire guild enter a search and seizure operation. One of the men inside the armored car asks if Sin is scared. But what the young man felt was an overwhelming anger for being deceived by the boy and losing sight of him. What Sin wanted most at that moment was revenge for all that humiliation. Meanwhile, in the dragon world, the two were conversing calmly. It seemed that species was truly capable of creating things from nothing. Callum shares his journey and says that even he didn't know he was a wizard at the time they met. Shahe then asks what made the boy decide to go to the land of dragons. Throwing a stone into the lake, the young man replies that he was just looking for a safe place to hide. He decided to go to that planet precisely because he knew that the GAR and the FAE would never think to look for him there. The dragon then responds that even if they wanted to, they couldn't due to the rules. It was better not to enter into conflict with their species, for they were capable of creating and destroying matter, and in their full form, they could compromise the entire continent. Because of this, neither of the other two species would stand a chance against them. Frankly speaking, the wizard had been lucky to be found by Shahe first, for if it had been any other dragon, he would probably have already turned into barbecue. Taking advantage of their conversation, Callum asks what happened to the people who attacked the academy a few months ago. But the other assures him that it was nothing serious, just a personal conflict. However, after that incident, Shahe decided to let the dust settle a bit before he could return, so he left his clones to take care of the place for a while. The young men are intrigued by this. They didn't know about a magic capable of creating clones. The dragon then shows how it's done. After all, he couldn't just walk around in his original form. And only at that moment does Callum realize that acting that way really made sense, leaving the dragon a bit confused. The young man then explains that even before becoming a wizard, he could see Shahi's natural form, which made everything more interesting. He probably inherited that part from his father. He then asks if it had to do with the senior who had raised him. But Shahe says it has to do with his blood father, not his adoptive one. The truth is that the young man had been raised by his grandparents, not his biological parents. The dragon himself never got to know the young man's biological father, but the magic surely came from him. Callum suspected this, but he never wanted to ask more deeply. But in the end, it seemed that his biological parents were out there, so he asks the dragon if he knows any more information about them. Shahe says he knows nothing about his father but knows about his mother. She was always very rebellious, and when she was younger, she ran away from home and disappeared. A few years later, she returned pregnant with him. She kept his birth a secret, and as soon as she had the opportunity, she left for the world again. His grandparents then took charge of his upbringing, but whether they wanted to or not, he would grow up and start asking questions about things, especially upon seeing the photos scattered around the house. Even so, they tried to protect him by saying that she was a family friend and that one day he would be able to meet her. Callum understood why his grandparents never talked about it. It must have been very difficult for them to deal with that whole situation. Shahe then places a hand on the young man's shoulder. Dragons normally didn't get involved in human matters, but even he could see how the boy's grandparents were good people. They just wanted to protect him, preventing that pain from hitting him while he was still young and immature. Well, the conversation was good, but the boy could no longer stay there. Otherwise, they would be in trouble. Callum then asks if he knows any other place where he can hide. Shahe says that the fairy world would suddenly be an option, even though it is unpredictable. The deepest part of the forest was more dangerous. In the vampire world, if he wanted to win the war, that place would be ideal, especially for having the enchanted materials he would need. It wouldn't be the first option he would choose, but it is an interesting option. The dragon then tells him to take care as he is in a risky position. Half of the supernatural world was after him, and most wanted Callum dead. Callum then becomes reflective and asks what he should do. Shahe responds by saying that the strong can do as they wish, and the weaker ones would endure whatever they could. In that case, the young man would have to choose the path of the strong. In a few seconds, the shapeshifter transforms into his 100% original form and completes the sentence by saying that this was how dragons did it. The young man is left speechless upon seeing a giant dragon in front of him. Meanwhile, Ray was trying to leverage his position to get more information, but the officer he was speaking to responds by saying that despite that, there was nothing more he could say. The agent was completely frustrated by this. After all, he was one of the few people who had come into contact with the wanted individual. But it was no use, since Callum didn't even use his real name while living in that city and was quite antisocial. So there really was nothing to help with. Ray then says that they had information that the young man was in Europe and wanted to know if he might have mentioned contacts in other countries at any point. But when it was a small town, so they didn't know anything about Europe, the officer replies. A woman approaches, handing a coffee to the agent. Taking advantage of the woman's presence, he starts talking to her to see if he could gather more information. But Jessica responds that she also had nothing to contribute. At that moment, the older man becomes irritated with Ray's insinuations about his daughter being involved in such a case. So politely, he was asking the agent to leave. Ray puts the cup back in place and says he will do as requested. If he remembered anything, he would leave his card for them to call him. Once inside the car, he realizes how much of a waste of time that was. But his partner had different information. She had gotten a story through a shapeshifter named Clara. So she is surprised. They couldn't use magic on children, but Felicia says he can rest assured the girl hadn't noticed. That said, after pondering for a bit, he asks what kind of information she had obtained. Felicia then says that the girl didn't remember much but that she had definitely been kidnapped by vampires at some point and teleported back. This confirms her theory that the first massacre had been something personal. It also confirmed that the other two Ray had spoken to earlier were withholding information. Even so, none of that was leading them in any direction. By the way things were going, they wouldn't be able to find Callum anytime soon. The portal to the vampire realm was completely different from the portal to the dragon realm, being much more protected. There were more than triple the agents in that place than in the previous cave. Even so, the defense mechanisms were simple. If the land of dragons was like the door of a safe, compared to them, the defense of the vampire portal was like the lock of a school locker. Probably the best strategy would be to teleport directly in front of the portal, considering how rudimentary the defense mechanisms were. Possibly no one would notice his presence there. Everything was actually seeming a bit easier than he expected. But there was only one way to find out if, in the end, this was a trap or not. Suddenly, the vampire portal begins to react, and one of the guards turns his back. But soon after, everything calms down again, so he concludes it was just his imagination. And in this way, Callum manages to pass through another portal without being detected. Unlike the dragon world, at that very moment, he found himself inside a castle. He had left Earth while the sun was still high in the sky, but in that place, it was already night, or perhaps it was always night. Callum didn't find that landscape more beautiful than the one at the other portal, but that varied from person to person. From the window, he could see a village and detect some wizards, which surprised him as he thought that land belonged only to vampires. But now he understood that in the land of dragons, wizards were not welcome. However, considering the connection of the GR with the vampires, they were probably welcome in that land. And knowing the huge difference between humans and wizards, and vice versa, some of them probably preferred to live around there. This also explained the lack of traps around the portal. If wizards usually went back and forth from that world, having traps around would be a problem. Everything really seemed too good to be true. The Court of the Night was definitely the worst place he could hide at the moment. After all, it was a world composed of the two species that wanted to see him imprisoned or worse. Staying in that place would be risky, but the dragon was right about the magic supplements. He should at least try to take a walk before leaving. Somewhere else in the Court of the Night, two people were hunting wolves in the middle of the forest. Even though they were only threats to humans, the vampires still had to deal with that hunt. It seemed they were forced to do everything to please that guild and its regulations. He thrust the sword while cursing indignantly at that. Suddenly, a new scent appeared in the air, and the two vampires went on alert. The woman said she sensed the presence of a wizard nearby, but at that hour, it was quite peculiar to have someone else there. She then asked what they should do, but the man replied that he would just let it go. If some wizard wanted to venture into the forest at night, let him. However, it would be a big problem if that wizard were the child of some noble and ended up losing his life in the middle of the forest. So she signaled to Court 12 and warned that she had sensed a wizard wandering in the forest, asking what they should do next. Impatiently, the guy said it was probably some air wizard just taking a stroll around. Even so, she preferred to be cautious rather than regretful. You never know, right? The vampire then received a return message telling her to return immediately to base. She questioned what was happening, but her superior just repeated that it was necessary for them to return quickly. Thus, they went to the castle, completely confused about what had happened and who that wizard could be. She then scolded the other vampire. As if he hadn't reported the strange movement, they would probably be in trouble at that moment. They would likely be asked for a report on what they had sensed, even if it was a weak presence. As soon as they entered the castle, a noble was already waiting for them. He asked if the two were the vampires on patrol, but they didn't recognize the guy and asked where their partner was. The man then introduced himself as Master Tyson and said that the problem was probably far beyond what their partner could handle. Upon hearing that he was a member of the BSE, the vampire completely changed his posture. Tyson then began to ask what they had seen in the forest, but they hadn't seen anything, only sensed the essence of a wizard nearby. The master asked if they were sure it was a wizard, and the woman replied that it was certainly a human magic, but she hadn't been able to detect its nature. That issue made things a bit more complicated. The man then asked what the BSE was doing in the night court. Tyson then replied that they believed the possible fugitive had escaped to the world between the portals. That human was definitely dangerous since he had attracted the attention of that guild. His strength was still not completely known, but at the moment, that man was considered high risk by the BSE. He then commanded the vampires to inform their partners to stay alert. If someone named Callum Wells appeared, they were to report to him immediately. After all, they needed to capture him as quickly as possible. No book he had read had prepared him to deal with the night court. His very name gave the feeling that there were monsters hiding around every corner, demons and witches using the darkness to their advantage, but none of them were that refined. Because what terrified in the night court were not the vampires or the other supernatural beings, but the moon that seemed like it would collide with that world at any moment. So large it was in the sky. When it pulsed, the whole earth pulsed too, sometimes very weakly like the ticking of a clock, and sometimes so strongly that even a mountain could rise in the blink of an eye. It seemed that the entire island was alive and breathing, a very mysterious creature that made it difficult to create a definition. But one thing was certain, he needed to get out of that place soon. The book said that magic supplements would be located in sinkholes or natural wells, but he had already walked through the forest all night, and the ground continued to shift with every step he took. The feeling that he was going the wrong way did not change. There must have been some other way to reach his destination. Suddenly, a noise was heard from outside the tent, and Callum opened it, trying to identify what it was. It seemed like some kind of giant insect and a tree were fighting. He had read about that in one of the books until he found the part that talked about the sturges. If he was right, he remembered that these insects usually built their nests in sinkholes, so he just needed to follow one of those creatures, and his problems would probably be solved. However, it seemed that the giant mosquito was losing to the tree, and Callum could not allow that to happen. The young man then decided to end it as quickly as possible. But at the same time, he remembered that he had to keep his presence as imperceptible as possible. If the vampires later found bullet casings in the middle of the forest, it wouldn't take long for them to realize he was around. He needed to be smart and think calmly. He had to take advantage of the tree's last attack to open a portal and redirect it to hit the enemy. This way, he managed to ensure that his presence was not easily detected. Without waiting another second, the creature took flight, forcing Callum to gather his things as quickly as possible and follow it. As he had expected, he managed to reach the location he was looking for, and there were indeed many of those sturges in that area. At the bottom of the pit, the water was bubbling, or could he even call that water? Right next to it were the magic crystals he so desperately needed. If he was cautious, he could collect some of that material through his portals. so it was time to see if that would work. He guided his magic down there, enveloped the stone, and brought it to himself. But as soon as he held it, an enormous pressure hit him, altering the ground around him, and causing all the monsters inside that cave to awaken. That was definitely not a good sign. Without them noticing his presence, things gradually calmed down. But if that whole reaction was because he had taken just one sphere, how complicated would it be to take the amount of crystals he needed? Due to that reaction, he would probably have to do everything in one go. And even then, he would still need something to distract them. He then observed the cave and opened a portal that teleported the tree monster's body directly into the cavern. All the creatures began to move, paying attention to that intruder, and the slime started to envelop the body of that tree. With the distraction and chaos down there, he took the opportunity to grab as many crystals as he could. He disappeared shortly after before anyone else noticed his presence there. A few hours later, 2 wizards were at the bottom of that pit. Whoever activated that nest was truly an idiot, and had made their job 1,000 times harder. Another man appeared, saying that a good portion of the crystals from that cave had disappeared. So the person who went there was after magical supplements. Maybe it was that wizard everyone was talking about. If that was the case, luck was on their side. He had to call Tyson right away and inform him that Callum Wells had passed through there. If they acted quickly enough, they would be able to capture him. As soon as he heard the information about Callum's presence, Tyson ordered all agents to go on high alert. They needed to capture that wizard no matter what. His subordinate asked if they were also going to the forest, but the master's idea was to stay close to the portal, preventing the wanted man from having any chance to escape. They needed to act quickly, as at that point, he probably already. But before he could finish that sentence, Tyson suddenly came face to face with Callum crossing the portal. A second of silence and despair hit everyone at that exact moment, freezing them in place. The young man was definitely in trouble. The commander shouted for them to capture him and sent the alert to the entire GAR, stating that the wanted man had been found in the night court. Despite this, it seemed he had managed to return to Earth. Everyone around the portal was then on high alert. On the radar, suddenly a presence began to blink, and all the soldiers started to move toward that area. Even so, they wanted the rebellious wizard to be captured alive. Commands were sent to the soldiers in real time. Even as he teleported, they managed to keep track of him. Finally, someone spotted him and asked for permission to take the shot. With permission granted, the soldier aimed and fired at the target. But just before the project hit Callum, he teleports. The warning he had managed to dodge is passed along. Gar was indeed faster than he had imagined. Why was his main magic not working? Suddenly, a person appears flying in the sky. He didn't have time to think, he needed to keep teleporting. At least 6 kilometers with each portal. Despite the fatigue, he couldn't stop. He also had to ignore the pain he could feel depending on where he teleported. He needed to keep moving. The last portal led to an alley in the middle of the city. Feeling nauseous, he goes to a nearby trash can, and ends up emptying everything out. Due to the amount of magic he used, he was quite dizzy. He couldn't even remember how many times he had teleported. Suddenly, a couple appears at the corner and spots him. In French, they ask if everything is okay with the young man and if they can help. He then responds by saying he didn't understand French, and the couple also didn't understand English. Callum hadn't realized yet, but he had ended up in France. Meanwhile, they continued searching for him. The capture had failed because they lost his trail. Because of this, they concluded that there was only one way to stop him. And finally, the order to the lethal forces is given. They could attack. Sin had arrived in Paris. He knew Callum should be around there. The boy could teleport, but the agent could keep up with him flying, just as fast. And considering how desperate he was, he certainly didn't think to hide his tracks. If Callum remembered well the types of magic he had been taught, he should know how efficient wind magic could be in finding him. Sun then activates his power, saying he wouldn't leave a single corner of the city untouched. Every sewer and even abandoned dumps. Any place where a trash like him could be hiding. And when he found him, it would be the exact moment his firepower would come into action. Coming out of the bathroom, Callum is startled to see Agent Sun right in front of him. Suddenly, a lightning bolt is shot in his direction, and the entire lobby of that building explodes completely. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.